just after it's got light, a metal detectorist is down on the beach. The tide is low, the sands are exposed, and the metal detectorist is walking along looking for little treasures that the sea might have brought in or uncovered, and he sees a strange kind of ragged bundle lying on the beach. And he walks up and he can see it's a body. He can see that whatever's happened to this person, it's not been a natural death.
Something very strange and terrible happened. He had 62 blows to his body. It was a mystery who this was. Nobody had been reported missing.
The body is literally in an unrecognisable state. There has been so much damage done to the head and face.
DCI John Claydon of Kent Police is deployed to the Isle of Sheppey to investigate.
The brutality of it was such that it was, from my own perspective, it was one of those things where it was as brutal as I've seen. Just brutally butchered. For what reason? What a way to go. I mean, some people, I don't know what misery they bring.
The victim was without trousers and shoes and underpants. There is no wallet, there is no passport, there's no driving licence, there's nothing at all to help the police. But there was one very interesting piece of evidence, and that is the body has a silver dragon design signet ring. Does anybody know? This is a very distinctive, very unusual ring. There won't be many rings like this, not in Kent, not in the surrounding area.
You need to circulate what we know, i.e. there's a dead body on the beach. Who is it? Why is it? We hope this ring will help us to identify the dead body. So we put out a message, really, for people to be aware. We posted it online in the hope that it may give us some indication as to who the body is.
The Isle of Sheppey is a pretty unique place. You have a very transient population. There's like 52 holiday parks on the island. So this is very much a place for people to go and visit. It's very much a tourist economy. And the vast majority of that tourism is made up of predominantly East Londoners.
It's a fairly isolated little place, isn't it? And you've got a lot of local people, and 99% of the people that pop down to the Isle of Sheppey have a nice time and no one gets hurt.
The most popular destination for Sheppey is Laysdown. Laysdown as a resort has always aimed at families. During the winter, you expect to see tumbleweed blowing across the promenade. But during the 6 weeks of the summer school holidays, it gets a brand new life of its own. It's packed with holidaymakers, and it's a whole community. It's a community within a community. Rumours tend to travel at lightning speed, and none more so than at Laysdown on the holiday parks, where everybody knows everybody's business. And so if you get a rumour, within hours, everybody seems to know about it.
Staying on one of the island's holiday parks for the summer is 34-year-old Gary Pocock.
Gary Pocock lived in the Barking and Dagenham areas of East London. He'd worked most of his life as a caretaker. He didn't have a direct family. His parents had passed.
He lived with his parents for quite a long time. When they knew that they were not well and that they were likely to pass away, his parents asked Gary's friends to look out for him. And I think this kind of speaks to Gary's innocent nature. He's very trusting. Gary is a bit of a classic nerd. You know, he was into World of Warcraft, all that kind of fantasy gaming. It's all very mild-mannered again, and, you know, an innocent hobby, but that was really his passion. I think that he perhaps struggled maybe in certain social situations, and he just needed a bit of extra guidance, and his parents were concerned for him that when they were gone, he wouldn't have that anymore.
But he'd found the love of his life, a woman who had children, and these were his adopted family, really. The children weren't his by birth, but he treated them as though they were his own.
On the death of his parents, Gary Pocock inherits some money and turns to his friend Mark Terry for advice on how to invest it.
Mark Terry was also from East London, and they'd come in contact through family connections, and he'd done some work for his friend Mark Terry, just odd jobs, just a little bit of building work and gardening and so forth. They were very different characters.
Mark Terry is a bit of a classic East End geezer, you know, a bit of a wide boy. He's relatively well known, even on the Isle of Sheppey. He's been holidaying there for years. He considers his second home on the Isle of Sheppey.
He was well respected. Certainly those that were close to him looked up to him. He had a group of teenage males predominantly that would help him out, that he would look after. He would put work their way. He was a bit of a father figure to some of the children down there, and clearly someone that they looked up to and someone that they would do quite a lot for.
Mark Terry owned a couple of chalets at this holiday park and said to him, "You should have one of these." And he had influence over Gary without a doubt, and Gary said, "Oh yeah, you know, that would be a great place, you know, it's by the sea, nice sandy beach at Warden Bay. Kids can go build sand castles, and yeah, I think that's a really good idea." Mark Terry, I think, sold him the idea of buying this chalet, and fairly quickly, you know, the deal was done and he took it over.
The Terrys and the Pococks are all on holiday in the Isle of Sheppey, staying just a few chalets apart.
To all intents and purposes, they were there with the family, with the children, enjoying the summer holiday. Mark Terry's partner, Lisa Terry, was clearly friends with Gary's partner, and Gary as well.
And everything was going absolutely fine. Until there was this terrible, terrible murder. In the summer of 2013, Mark Terry and Mark Terry's family were staying at a caravan on the Isle of Sheppey, where they were joined by Gary Pocock and his family.
It's very much home from home. You rent a chalet or you own a chalet, and then you walk 100 yards to your neighbourhood pub down there. A lot of people know each other, so there's, you know, quite a lot of socialising goes on.
Mark Terry arranges a pub crawl with Gary. He also invites his son Matt, his friend Chris, and some mates from the island.
The night started with drinks in Merlin's Bar, which was a very busy nightclub in Lacedown, and a good place to start.
It seems that probably Mark Terry says, "I'm fed up with this place now, I'm bored with here. Let's go somewhere more interesting, a bit further along the seafront." So they all leave Merlin's, all had several pints of beer, no doubt. You know, they're all very jolly and merry, everything seems to be fine.
And then the party walked along the road and then down the promenade, past all the amusement arcades, which were still open, still making a noise. And they walked down to the seafront, where there was the talk of the town pub. And that, again, very popular, very busy pub.
If you've been drinking in the talk of the town and seen this group come in, nothing remarkable about them. They're just a group of lads out for a few beers and a bit of fun. Everything seems to be fine.
But Gary does not return home.
Gary Pocock's partner is worried. All she knows is that Gary went on a night out with the boys and he never came back. So Mark Terry goes to see her, and he says that on this night Gary had just left with another woman. He's cheated on her and he's disappeared, either gone off with this other woman or maybe he's too ashamed to come home.
Lisa Terry undertook a role in supporting her. She was providing support to her.
And by now she's really starting to worry. As soon as she sees that the police put out this picture of this ring, she can say without doubt that that is Gary's ring.
She immediately calls their friend back on the island, Mark Terry, who calls the police.
Hello, yeah, I've just heard that the body on the beach was actually a friend of mine. So obviously, I might have information you guys need. So do you want to come around and see me, or do I come to you, or what do I do? You can imagine we're all hoping it wasn't my friend, and obviously it is my friend, so...
Right, okay. Thank you. Can I take your name first of all?
Yeah, of course, it's Mark Terry, Terry.
This person's really trying to help, was genuine, was doing their utmost to assist the investigation. It's a big moment because once you've got that identity, then take the investigation onwards.
You know, it's your friend then?
Right, what it was, his girlfriend was in the chalet I sold them about a year ago. Right, what it is, she's seen his ring on the Sheppey website thing. I don't know. Listen,
oh, right, okay, yeah.
Right, she's seen his ring. We know it was. She knows it's definitely his ring, so it's definitely him.
He's talking very fast as if he's overwhelmed by the emotion and, he's shocked and confused. And he's also saying things very conclusively. This isn't someone holding out to that last bit of hope and then it sounds like he's tearing up.
What he done, we went out for a drink and he went off with somebody else and we thought he was with her. And obviously, something's gone really badly wrong and somehow he's ended up dead.
Right, okay, but you were actually with him the other night?
He's keen to help the police. He's volunteering the fact that he was with the victim, a few hours before he was found dead.
Was his girlfriend with him the other night as well?
No, she was at the chalet.
But he went off with another woman then?
Yes, he did. From the talk of the town. We thought he was back in Barking, so which is really, his girlfriend got a text sometime yesterday saying he was back home. So he's back. So he told her he's back in Barking Dagenham. We didn't think anything of this. We knew it wasn't him. Yeah, it's just such a shock. I can't believe it. We just can't believe it. God.
He spends 2 minutes, nearly 2 minutes, talking to the police, explaining how sad he is, how mystified he is, and he just sounds totally shocked that it could be his friend.
"36 hours after he was discovered, the washed-up body is formally identified as 34-year-old Gary Pocock.
It was obviously quite a relief when we managed to sort of make progress. It was brutal for Gary Pocock, who wasn't deserving of the treatment he got. It's stressful if you've been dealing with an investigation. Because of the uncertainty, it could have been anybody, couldn't it, that randomly attacked somebody.
The mile-long beach is cordoned off as a crime scene.
You've got so many questions unanswered. A deserted beach in the middle of what is a fairly well-populated holiday area, but with nothing immediately looking over the scene, no witnesses, so very, very, very little to go on. Who was involved? Is there a wider risk to the public of there being somebody out there that is clearly someone that needs to be apprehended by the police as soon as possible? Where's our starting point?
You keep your crime scene on as long as you absolutely need to, because you don't know what else you're going to find, and they will literally do a line search, a fingertip search of the area. We were able to see that there was some coins, there was also some keys, and there was also a tooth. It was believed that there was an attack site with some drag marks with the presence of blood, and this was taken down towards the direction of the beach. So we came to the conclusion subsequently that the body had been put out to sea and had actually come back in with the tide.
Also washed up are 2 baseball bats, one of which is snapped in half.
From my perspective, it was likely to have been a weapon that had been used, and such was the ferocity of the actual attack that it had broken the baseball bat.
The bats had been in the water. Never rule out the fact that you won't get anything back forensically. Never ever do that. You explore all possibilities.
The police are desperate for a lead as to who could have caused such brutality on the island.
There were rumours flying all over the place, and the whole island was on fingertips, you know, waiting to know what had really happened.
The police would have known straight away that this was not going to be a case that would be necessarily solved easily or quickly. And of course, they start immediately to canvass for eyewitnesses. They start looking for CCTV. People locally quickly get to know something serious has happened, and the buzz goes around very quickly. There's been a murder.
I worked all the way through the night and the next day because it was that type of inquiry that you just needed to keep the momentum going. And the village hall was key to us. I mean, we ended up staying there. It was somewhere that we could say, look, we need your help, and this is where we're going to be.
Detectives need to speak to the locals and tap into any rumours spreading through the island.
In many cases, you need the assistance from the local community because the community may have information that can be of assistance to the investigation.
We had in excess of 1,000 chalets that were in the immediate area of the beach where Gary Pocock's body was discovered. Any one of those chalets could have provided us with a key witness. But also, any one of those chalets could have provided us with a suspect.
We go knocking on doors. That's the harsh truth of it. Trying to uncover who's in that caravan, who are they, where they come from, where they're going to, whether they're people that are exiting to go back to their home or whatever. So that you can imagine the amount of energy that's put into making sure that that aspect of it, dull as it may sound, is actually carried through, because the person otherwise could have walked off and never been seen again.
But detectives direct most resources at the holiday park where Gary Pocock's friends are still staying.
We're always going to have in the back of our mind who has done this. Mark Terry, he was telling us that he was the last person or one of the last people to see Gary alive. He would be declared a witness to us, and probably a significant witness to us. We need to understand why they're talking to us, how they can help the investigation, and we need to make sure that what we're being told is accurate.
A signet ring became quite important in as much as it was the key to identify the body on the beach is Gary Pocock. Then the next thing is, who are the associates? Where were they? Witnesses that may have seen it. So all of a sudden, from what was a small moment, we've now got a bigger picture that's being created.
As Kent Police CCTV team search all footage near to the crime scene for any sighting of Gary and his associates, the forensics lab comes back with the results from the 2 baseball bats.
We were able to identify DNA of Gary Pocock. It all fits in with blunt force trauma, and this was really quite a good indication that those weapons were the ones that were responsible for causing the murder. On one of the baseball bat handles there was some tape. Underneath that tape was a fingerprint impression. That fingerprint impression was identified to Jamie West.
Jamie West, a 19-year-old islander, becomes a suspect in Gary's murder.
It was shocking. I mean, all murders are shocking, but crime seems to be committed by people who have come to Sheppey from the mainland. And why it was so strange to realise, to hear in this murder, that a local islander might have taken part.
It is a big moment for the investigation because you're hitting all these barriers and then you get something that could be a bit of a breakthrough. So we need to establish all sorts of things in relation to associates and the lifestyle they lead.
Police intelligence look for any background connection between Jamie West, Gary Pocock and Mark Terry.
Mark Terry and Gary's friends on the island, they went to pay their respects by placing some flowers at the location where Gary's body had been found. There was a camera crew there.
The media interest locally and nationally ramps up quite a lot. So the police haven't solved this case, but the answer's out there. They ask Mark if he'll go up in front of the camera. You're his great mate. Listen, why don't you go and do it? And he says, all right, I will.
It hasn't sunk in properly yet. Something like this is just knocked everybody for six. None of us can actually understand the reason behind this.
Mark Terry made himself available more than he needed to be because he'd said what he'd said.
Matt Terry also decided that he was going to say something on camera as well.
I'd rather justice be served and whoever it is to be locked up for the rest of their life, because nobody should have that done to them. Nobody in the world.
First impressions with Matt Terry was that he was fairly bright, had a future of some description, no doubt, capable of lots of things. He's fit looking.
Young lad, student, I think reasonably popular. He had a decent looking car, which probably again would create an impression about the type of person he was. Presented as somebody who had an awful lot of respect for his dad, saw his dad as a bit of a fixer. He'd always listen to his dad and go by what his dad would suggest to do.
Detectives review Mark's account from the night of Gary's murder.
What was really important to us is trying to prove or disprove the accounts we were given. And clearly the account given by Mark Terry that Gary had met up with another female, and the only way to obtain that evidence is by throwing resources at it.
Police officers speak to pub owners and local residents. Did anyone see the woman Gary met with on the night of his murder?
Police get as much CCTV footage as they can from the area, places like the pubs along the seafront. And sure enough, from Merlin's bar, they recover interesting footage.
This is the group leaving Merlin's to start to make their way down towards the waterfront. So you have Mark Terry leaves first with Gary Pocock behind him, and then at this point, two young men walking behind him. We need to identify who those males are.
Digital forensic investigators collate all the available footage from the seafront to follow each of the men's individual movements.
What we see here is two young men leave the pub at one moment during the evening and they go to a convenience store. What they're doing in the convenience store isn't of importance, but footage like this provides us with key evidence in terms of identification, because what we can see from the footage is clearer images of the two's faces. We can see their clothing, you can look at their build, you can look at how they walk, and that helps us to identify them on further bits of footage where perhaps the facial images aren't as good, the quality of the CCTV is not as good.
Detectives identify the two men. First is 20-year-old Matt Terry, followed by a local 15-year-old schoolboy, Richie Zabrowski. In further footage, detectives also identify Christopher Bones, a 19-year-old friend of Matt Terry from London.
I mean, the evidential value of the CCTV, it helps bring it all together, them going out socially, drinking, the movements of them afterwards as well.
There is yet more interesting CCTV from along the seafront. What we have is Matthew Terry, Mark Terry's son, leaves the pub ahead of the others. He goes out to the car park, He unlocks his very distinctive red Ford Focus, drives it along the seafront towards the home of a man called Jamie West.
Jamie West is the local teenager who is evidenced to be the owner of the baseball bats found at the crime scene. Detectives speculate why Matt Terry would leave the pub crawl to travel towards his home.
It's all recorded clear as day on the CCTV. There's a lot of cameras along that seafront, and there's this group of men apparently quite happily walking along. And then for some reason they deviate from their course along the paved way of the esplanade and disappear onto the beach.
It's just 4 people walking along, seemingly going back home after a good night out.
Less than 40 minutes later, there is more footage that stands out to the detectives.
We see 3 males walking past. They are later identified to be Mark Terry, Chris Bones and Richie Zabrowski.
Guess who's not with them? What's happened to Gary Pocock? No explanation. You know, come on, what's happened to him?
Had Gary Pocock returned to the talk of the town, we'd have seen that on the footage. Had there been a female that was following the group behind, we'd have seen that as well, and we didn't. We know this is the last time that we've seen Gary Pocock alive. In our eyes, proves the lies, untangles this web that has been told from us from the very first phone call that Mark Terry makes to the police.
Hello, yeah, I've just heard that the body on the beach was actually a friend of mine. So obviously I might have information you guys need. We went out for a drink and he went off with somebody else and we thought he was with her.
We were really able to pull apart the accounts we were given. If we can identify one lie, then are there others?
With the 5 suspects now linked to Gary Pocock through CCTV and DNA evidence, the police make their arrests, and one by one they are interviewed in custody.
The police are looking for the weakest link. They separate them and start to, try and have a conversation with them, ask them questions and see if they would talk at all. All of them steadfastly denied having any knowledge of or taking part in the murder. It's time, I guess, as far as the police are concerned, to turn up the heat on the suspects.
The police still need more evidence to link the 5 suspects to Gary Pocock's murder. They start to investigate the text sent to Gary's partner the day after the murder, which was supposed to look like it had come from Gary.
First and foremost, we need to know what number it came from, because it was clear it hadn't come from Gary Pocock's phone. So we were able to identify the number and the person who owned that telephone. And as a result of that, an inquiry was made to visit that individual.
The owner of the phone, who works in East London, tells police officers his account.
That individual went walking to a bus stop. He was stopped by a young man who he didn't know. He said that he'd fallen out with his girlfriend and needed to make contact with her. Could he borrow his phone? And that's exactly what he did. A young man sent a text message inferring it was in fact Gary, but it wasn't.
Police urgently need to identify the young man at the bus stop who borrowed this phone while pretending to be Gary Pocock.
That in itself opens up an awful lot of work for us, but we know London buses have CCTV fitted with them.
Detectives identify over 50 buses that could have passed the bus stop within the hour that the text message was sent.
We, seized a colossal amount of footage. What did help us was that we knew the time the text was sent, so we were able to then focus.
After hours of analysing all available footage, they see the owner of the phone talking to a young man at the bus stop. Afterwards, the young man leaves on foot.
The person was walking towards the vehicle.
The young man gets into the car, but they can't make out the registration plate.
We continue going through the footage and eventually we identify a bus that pulls up behind that red vehicle at some red traffic lights, and just before the traffic lights go green again and the red vehicle pulls off, we get a crystal clear image of the car registration.
Detectives trace the registration plate to Matt Terry.
We've got conclusive proof that this is Matt Terry. That was a major breakthrough in the investigation, and one of those moments that we would refer to as a golden nugget moment, because you've got him.
The police now have proof that it was in fact Matt Terry who sent the text to make it appear that Gary Pocock was still alive.
I think there's a really important power dynamic at play here, where Mark Terry is essentially trying to cover his tracks. He gets his son to travel back home and basically to feed her some lies. He's trying to cover all of his key alibi points, so she's not going to raise questions about whether that's Gary's body on the beach.
This gives detectives even more compelling evidence to put to the suspects.
They interview them over and over again with no success, until it's the fourth interview where one admits that he was present at the scene.
And eventually, look, I was there, I was involved, I do know what went on, but I am heavily influenced by Mark Terry.
Police finally have what they need. They can now charge all 5 of the men. Mark Terry, his son Matt Terry, his friend Chris Bones, and the 2 islanders, Richie Zabrowski and Jamie West.
All 5 are charged with the murder of Gary Pocock. As far as the law is concerned, it's a joint enterprise. All 5 men pleaded not guilty, and they're all sent for trial the following year at Maidstone Crown Court. In a trial like this, the victims' families have to go through the ordeal of listening to all the events, no matter how gory, no matter how upsetting. Every last grisly detail has to be laid out in full, in detail, for the benefit of the jury.
The defendants begin on each other. They each deny any direct involvement in the murder, except for one, who gave his account from the witness box. At Maidstone Crown Court, one defendant tells the jury his account of Gary Pocock's murder.
I have a summary of the interview. He admitted that he was present when Gary Pocock was murdered, and he said that it was pre-planned.
Mark Terry decides to hold a meeting for the rest of the gang.
Mark Terry said to them, you know, we need to deal with this bloke. He's a paedophile. He's in their parlance, they would call him a nonce. We need to sort him out. You know, he needs to pay for these horrible crimes.
An accusation that is so heinous that it immediately dehumanises Gary Pocock, the worst of the worst. What Mark Terry's really doing is, it's like he's whipping up a mob. It's like he's getting a vigilante group together there and then, whilst they're all intoxicated, and I think he's doing that very intentionally.
Motivated by the horrific rumour, the young men help Mark to lure Gary Pocock to the beach.
They'd have gone on the beach, going down these steps, and I'm surmising, in fact, that this is where it's all happened. Matt Terry is waiting just over there, waiting to come out from their hiding and then attack. He had no time to make any sort of escape.
Matt ran over, smacked him all over the head. I've seen him go down.
He manages to cry out and probably shouting, you know, stop, don't do any more of that. And he gets to his feet and he tries to run away. But he's very quickly pursued and caught by Matthew Terry, who's wielding a baseball bat.
Then I saw the hit connected straight on the back of his head. Gary fell to the floor screaming. He couldn't run because Mark, Chris and Matt were punching, kicking him, hitting him with the bat. There was an explosion of blood.
Then, of course, is an absolute frenzy of violence.
There's a lot of symbolism, I think, within this murder as well, because this isn't just murdering someone as quick and easily as possible. You're seeing this mob essentially gang up on one victim, and also specifically the fact that he's had his trousers removed and then he's stomped on, that directly links to what they've been told, which is that Gary Pocock is a paedophile.
I saw the body go up and down. I thought he was dead now, as I couldn't see his stomach moving. Mark said they had to get rid of him, drop him in the sea. Alibi was discussed when they were walking back from the attack. They all had a shower. Mark washed the clothes with bleach. Chris is pouring everyone drinks.
This was an horrific murder, and one of the most violent, I think, that I've ever seen and heard. It is, without a doubt, one of the worst crimes that Sheppy has seen. It must have been hell for him to go through.
Mark Terry told the group that Gary Pocock had assaulted a teenage girl.
You don't need to prove motive for murder, but it was never reported to us. Any allegation of that nature is a serious allegation to be made. What isn't right is for people to take justice in their own hands. What is right for that to be reported to the police. Gary Pocock deserved the opportunity to speak up for himself. That opportunity was taken away from him.
Mark Terry decided not to give evidence at trial.
I think he very knowingly is manipulating the people around him. He knows that this group of young men are very easily amped up. He wants to stoke the flames against Gary Pocock, and he knows that the ultimate worst thing that a man could be accused of doing is being a paedophile. And he knows that by dropping that in with these intoxicated young people, that it is going to escalate.
The whole thing seems to have been driven by Mark Terry. Don't forget, there was a huge age difference between him and the rest of the group. He was in his 40s. The rest of them were all, 20 years or so younger than he was. And I think that they looked up to him as an influential character, perhaps even a little bit of a father figure. Nobody wanted to argue with him.
He's created a witch hunt. If you create this monster, then you don't feel bad about going after them, to switch off those human emotions and attack.
Another piece of CCTV also makes its mark on the jury.
As they're just about to go off the camera, Chris Bones does pretty much a fist pump into the air. Now only he can tell us what that meant, but certainly knowing the rest of the information that's already been put to them, I think the jury would have looked at that and put quite a big significance to that in terms of his demeanour and what they'd achieved.
They hardly have the demeanour of people who've just taken the life of an innocent human being. I've covered hundreds of murders in my time, but having said all that, I'm still, quite taken aback by the casual nonchalance that this group strike afterwards. They don't seem to be affected by what they've done at all. If anything, they seem to be probably a bit high on the adrenaline of it.
The case concludes and the jury retire. Following the 10-week trial, Mark Terry, Matt Terry, Christopher Bones and Richie Zabrowski are found guilty of murder. Jamie West is found guilty of manslaughter.
The judge, in summing up, said that Mark Terry was the ringleader and the mastermind behind it and organised everything.
We thought he was back in Barking, and obviously something's gone really badly wrong and somehow he's ended up dead.
Mark Terry's attempt to put the heat off him by doing the 999 call to the police and the interview with the television news team ended up giving the police an awful lot more evidence.
None of us can actually understand the reason behind this.
I think Mark Terry believed that he could outsmart us, the police. He underestimated us, he underestimated the team.
Jamie West, sentenced to 7 years in a youth detention centre. Richie Zabrowski, sentenced to life with a minimum term of 13 years. Christopher Bones, sentenced to life with a minimum term of 18 years. Matt Terry, sentenced to life with a minimum term of 19 years. Mark Terry, sentenced to life with a minimum term of 26 years.
What's very clear here is, regardless of what led up to this, Mark Terry was very much the instigator, and none of the people around him stopped to ask questions. And following that blindly can be so dangerous. That's clearly what happened, and ultimately Gary paid the price and he lost his life.
When you see just their stupidity, you know, but as you get to a certain age, you become more, I suppose, thoughtful about why did they do that. When you see kids, which is what the majority of those were, and they're still now troubled by the consequences of some very bad decision making, they'll certainly regret those choices they made, and they've got another 20 plus years to ponder it. It was complete madness, and the person best placed to having stopped it in the first instance would have been Mark Terry. But you know, it's one of those things that you just can't fathom why people do what they do.
Something that could easily be forgotten is those that Gary Pocock left behind. Gary Pocock's partner was someone who featured very heavily in our investigation, but after the trial, after the convictions, she's still there. She's still got that loss and that hole in her life.
A cherished family at the center of a small town.
They laughed and they joked around and they were happy together. They were loved and well respected in our community.
Is gunned down in cold blood.
I'll never forget walking in the house that morning and seeing what I saw. Who could have done this? Was it somebody that they knew? Maybe this person had sought some type of revenge.
Detectives pursue a trail of suspects.
He was actually set to gain from the death.
And then his behavior was alarming.
During the polygraph, he started tearing the stuff off. I know they had had issues within their relationship.
They said, well, I can take care of that problem for the right sum of money.
But the killer remains elusive.
What are we missing? What are we not doing?
Until a shocking confession reveals the true culprit.
And she agreed to wear a recording device and elicit some more information. I mean, it was just incredible. It was disturbing.
The killer was about the most unexpected thing. It was such a shock.
Columbia, Kentucky is a small but tight-knit rural community.
Everyone knows everyone else. Your neighbors feel like family. People watch out for one another.
Not uncommon, you'd be walking downtown, you'll stop, run into friends or family. Very friendly atmosphere.
One of the most beloved families in Columbia are the Wellnitzes. They own a veterinary clinic just steps away from their home.
I just remember that environment at the clinic was a place that I, as a kid, wanted to spend every spare moment that I had, just because it was a great place to be. Joe and Beth, their kids, Dennis and Meg, they were kind, they were loving, and they were fun to be around.
On February 26, 1993, the town forever changes after two of Joe and Beth's employees make a grim discovery just after 8 a.m. at the Wellnitz home.
2 employees had shown up for work, but Joe and Beth were not at the clinic. The clinic was adjacent to the residence. So the gentleman walked over to the house, went in the back door, and discovered Joe's body in the downstairs area of the home. The lady that had also shown up for work that morning, she then went to the house, discovered two bodies upstairs.
Joe and Beth and their son, Dennis, they've been shot. Then she ran out and called the police.
Investigators rushed to the scene.
I'll never forget walking in the house that morning and seeing what I saw. It was just total shock. I knew what kind of people they were. I knew how kind they were and how compassionate they were with their work that they did. I couldn't believe it. When we entered the house, there was Joe laying there on the floor. He was on his stomach. His hand was underneath his chest.
He had a pair of gray sweatpants on and a white t-shirt. It looked like he came out of a bathroom and had been shot and fell face first. Blood that had pooled around the body.
My initial reaction was shock. But then I realized shortly thereafter that I had a job to do, and my job was to take care of the scene, to see if we could find out who did this horrible thing. Around the scene where Joe was found, there was multiple shell casings, and you could see bullet holes in the walls. We went from there to the upstairs, and we found Dennis's body laying there in his bedroom. He had no shirt on. You could see bullet holes in his back. There was also shell casings laying around. Looked like he was crawling on the floor and was executed by the killer at that point. Entering into the back bedroom that belonged to Joe and Beth, you could see multiple shell casings back there.
Beth was found on the side of the bed nearest to the doorway. She appeared to have been standing when she was shot, with multiple gunshot wounds to her head and upper torso. The Wellnitses were all found either in or near a bed or in clothes that suggested they had been sleeping. So it was apparent that it had happened during the night at some point or early morning hours.
After examining the bodies, police scour the rest of the house for clues, but there's no sign of a murder weapon.
There were no broken windows, there was no furniture turned over, the house had not been ransacked. It was significant that there was no forced entry, that at least gave the impression that it was somebody with some degree of familiarity with the home and with the Wellness family. It appeared this family had been targeted.
Who could have done this? You know, who is the person that would have done such a horrible crime in this community that is usually so gentle? Was it somebody that they knew? Maybe this person had sought some type of revenge. Once we saw that these three people had been murdered, we immediately wanted to know, where is Meg Wellnitz at, so we can find her to make sure she's safe, first of all, make sure she's not a victim. We were able to locate her. She was at school in Lexington and was unharmed.
Officers are tasked with breaking the news to Joe and Beth's daughter.
Meg was told that her mom and dad and brother were murdered, were dead. I really felt sorry for her. I thought, now how is she going to go on? You know, how does she recover from this?
We got a phone call just a little while after I got up, and they said Beth and Joe have been killed. And at that moment, we didn't know Dennis also had been killed. And I just stayed in my room that day and just cried. Just couldn't believe that they were gone. They were like a second set of parents for me.
One of my family members had called. They gave me the horrible news that Joe and Beth and Dennis had all been murdered. And that's a day you don't forget.
Joe Wellnitz was born in 1942 and grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. From a young age, he always loved animals and turned that passion into a career.
Not many rural communities anywhere would have been able to boast of having a veterinarian with the background that Joe had. Joe was one of the most caring, kindest gentleman that you will ever meet.
In his 30s, Joe met Beth Preston, a woman 10 years his junior. Both divorced, they married in 1979, and Joe adopted her 2 kids, Dennis and Meg. 2 years later, they moved their family and Joe's clinic from Lexington to Columbia.
Meg would come in and out of the clinic. Dennis would mostly, I would just see him outside. He was only 20 years old.
Dennis was popular in school. He had worked in town. He had attended college. He was just a well-liked young man.
Beth was the one I was closest to. She was the face of the clinic. She was the person everyone saw when they walked in the door. Always had a smile on her face. The relationship between Joe and Beth was perfect to me. They laughed and they joked around and they were happy together. They were a very happy family.
But one horrific night has changed everything. Who could have wanted to kill the Wellnitzes, and why?
The 2 employees that discovered the bodies were certainly interviewed that morning. There was really no motive, and the way the 2 of them arrived that morning, there was really no opportunity for either of them to commit the murders. They were dismissed as suspects.
In Lexington, police asked Meg to help them piece together her family's last movements. She says she visited them for dinner 2 days ago, but had returned that night as she had school.
Meg told the police that she'd been in Lexington the night before the bodies were found, and that she'd been playing cards with some friends, her boyfriend, as well as another couple, Bill Meese, and then Bill Meese's wife.
When asked if Meg was aware of any problems at home, she gives police their first lead.
There was a couple that were tenants of Joe and Bess they may have had issues with, and their names Brenda and Dave Cowell.
The Cowells had been living in a cabin on the Wellnitz property.
They were living there rent-free, exchanged for doing some work for Joe and Beth. There was some discrepancy there about whether they were doing the work sufficiently or not. Joe and Beth felt like they weren't, so they gave them a bill for $1,800 for the rent. And ultimately, they never paid it. They filed bankruptcy.
Were the Cowells angry enough to want the Wellnitzes dead? Was this murder payback?
They were persons of interest, people that we needed to talk to. We needed to prove or disprove whether they were involved in it or not.
Coming up, fear races through the community.
We thought if this could happen to the Wellnitzes, it could happen to any of us. Who would be next? People were scared. Everybody wanted to know who did it, why they did it, and how they did it.
Everybody was just guessing, gossiping.
And police unearthed family secrets, indicating a potential motive.
It was a surprise to me to learn that there was another child involved. There was actually a will giving him so much money out of the estate.
Before a shocking confession, reveals a killer no one could have imagined.
It was a bombshell. Couldn't believe it.
Police investigating the homicide of Joe, Beth, and Dennis Wellnitz have their first suspects, tenants who had recently clashed with the family over money.
When we learned about the bankruptcy, about them living on the property, this discrepancy about the work they were doing, whether it was sufficient or not, especially when it came to the money, and then this bill for $1,800, we thought, well, this could be a motive for them wanting to do something. We knew that we had to talk to them. We had to see if they were involved.
Police learned the Cowells no longer live on the Wellnitz property.
Maybe they left there disgruntled. We went on that theory. Maybe they had went to the Wellnitz house that morning and then got into it with them, and then that's when all this escalated from there.
While detectives tracked down the Cowells, officers canvassed the area for witnesses.
We did a neighborhood canvass to talk to people to see if anybody in that area had heard anything, seen anything, or had any other information that they could provide. We were not able to identify anybody that did hear anything that went on that night during the shooting or anything.
4 days after the murder, Detectives locate the Cowles and bring them in for separate interviews. Brenda claims she didn't hold any grudge against the Wellnitzes.
She told us that even though they had not paid the money that Joe and Beth felt like they owed, they had worked out the discrepancy and everything had moved on from that.
Police asked Brenda where she was the night of the murder.
They ended up moving off the farm. She said she was not there. She was at home when it happened.
When detectives speak with Brenda's husband, Dave, he's unable to confirm her alibi because of his own.
Dave was working in Louisville, Kentucky, which is almost in Indiana, probably 100 miles from where this happened at. He adamantly denied any involvement in this. He didn't want it to do harm to them.
Investigators speak to friends of the Wellnitzes to confirm the dispute with the Cowles had been resolved.
We were talking to friends in that area. We were able to determine that that situation where those hard feelings were had been resolved a long time prior to this happening. They were ruled out as far as having anything to do with this murder.
With no arrests made, fear begins to grip the town.
We thought if this could happen to the Wellnitzes, it could happen to any of us. It could happen to anyone. They were loved and well respected in our community, and so if they could be killed, who would be next? People were scared. Everybody wanted to know who did it, why they did it, and how they did it.
Word travels fast. Everybody was expressing their opinion as to what may or may not have contributed to this, but everybody was just guessing, gossiping.
It's got the whole community in an uproar about what happened. We had to get some answers pretty quickly, make sure that it wasn't some random killing and that other people may be coming next. When we started thinking about who could have done this, we started thinking about the veterinary business. People get very sensitive about their pets, so we thought, well, maybe somebody had gotten disgruntled over that. We learned from the employees there that there was an issue between Jerry Yarberry and the Wellnitzes where he had brought in his dog to have treatment done to its eye, and the dog ultimately was blind. So we thought, well, maybe this might be a motive for somebody to do harm to them. Some of the key questions that we wanted to know from Jerry was, how did he feel now toward the Wellnitzes, and how did he feel toward what had happened between them?
Police bring Jerry into the station for questioning.
He told us that he was very upset about his pet. He refused to pay the bill that was owed to the Wellnitzes. They ended up having to file a lawsuit against him in order to recoup the funds.
While Jerry admits he was angry with Joe, he says he isn't a killer.
He adamantly denied doing anything to the Wellnitzes as far as going to that extreme. When we talked to Jerry, we learned that he was home watching TV with his wife and kids, and we were able to confirm that that's where he was at, and therefore we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
There's frustration on the part of the police because they want to see a crime solved. They want to see a murderer, in this case, held accountable. They want to see that person punished. And then there's frustration because we don't know if justice is ever going to be served.
As the case threatens to stall, a friend of the Wellnitz family contacts police with pertinent information.
I said, I'm a real estate broker. An hour getting the property ready to sell, there was an indenture, kind of a rectangle, in the floor of that master bedroom closet. I knew for a fact Joe and them kept a floor safe upstairs in their bedroom in the closet. I'm assuming, but that's where he kept all these important papers, his deed, anything that was of significance.
Gives you the opinion that the safe was part of the plan all along, that the killer knew where that safe was at. It was not setting out in the open where you would commit these 3 murders and then say, okay, there's a safe, I'm gonna take that with me. It was hidden back in a closet.
It certainly caused the officers to focus their attention on who would want that safe, who would know the safe was there, and who would stand to have some benefit from removing the safe. especially in light of the fact that nothing else was taken, nothing else was disturbed.
If we could locate that safe, and very easily, that's going to put us on the trail of whoever committed this crime.
Police investigating the first triple homicide in Columbia, Kentucky, are searching for an object stolen from the scene they hope will lead them to the killer.
The missing fire safe was certainly a critical piece of evidence that the officers were investigating. They tried to determine more specifically what the contents of the safe were, what was in there, what was going to perhaps turn up that might then be a clue.
In talking to the family, we were able to learn that there was possibly could be insurance papers in that safe, maybe even up to around $1,000.
In this case, the only motive was to either cause the death of the Wellens family or to take the safe out.
As detectives put out an APB for the safe, the autopsy results come in.
One of the crucial things that we need to know is the time of death.
As far as the time frame of the death, the internal examination of the bodies was consistent that they had been killed within a few hours prior to the bodies being discovered.
It's estimated Joe, Beth, and Dennis were murdered around 4 a.m.
The medical examiner was able to determine that each victim died as a result of multiple gunshot wounds.
None of the victims had defense marks on their bodies, meaning they had likely been taken by surprise.
Additional projectiles were recovered from the bodies during the autopsy. The firearms examiner did determine that all of the shots were fired from a 9mm handgun. It did seem likely that they were all fired by the same person, given the fact that they were all fired from the same gun.
Obviously, from there, we're going to start doing multiple interviews to try to eliminate or show who has killed these three people, who could have that much of a grudge against them. During our investigation, we were able to learn that Joe had another son by the name of Eric. From my previous personal experience with Joe and Beth, I didn't know about Eric until after the murder. Joe had adopted him much the way that he did with Meg and Dennis, and then that marriage broke apart. It was a surprise to me to learn that there was another child involved that Joe had adopted at a young age. We started receiving information, documentation showing that Eric was actually still set to gain from the death of Joe. There was actually a will giving him so much money out of the estate to the tune of $250,000. Eric was somebody that we needed to talk to because that much money obviously would be a motive for somebody to do something like this.
Police tracked the 19-year-old down at his home in Lexington.
When Eric was interviewed, he was shocked that it occurred. They had issues within their relationship, him and Joe. It was a very distant relationship and then non-existent after a while. Eric also indicated that he felt like he was replaced by Dennis. They had completely become estranged after so long and had stopped any contact with each other. One of the things that we learned was that Eric did resent Joe. Part of that resentment was because of this estrangement.
Had Eric settled a score and inherited a fortune by killing the family? When police question him about the will, they are taken aback by his response.
When he learned that he was a beneficiary to this will, he was actually surprised that he was included in it, because of they've been estranged for that many years.
But detectives can't just take Eric at his word.
The motive is there, the possibility, so we needed to know whether he had any type of alibi that we could substantiate to make sure that he wasn't in Columbia that morning. We learned during our interview with Eric Wellness that he had worked that night, and then once he got off work, he went to a friend's house and slept at that friend's house.
Eric says he was in Lexington the entire night, 2 hours away from Columbia.
So we were able to talk to that friend and determine that he did not have the opportunity to commit this crime. We felt pretty certain that he was not a suspect at this point. We eliminated him and moved on.
I was shocked, and it was an odd situation being questioned by the police officers. The fact that I was named in the will, if that was something that I had known, then that for sure gives me a motive. But there's no way in the world I could have ever done anything like that. Yes, I was angry as a child, you know, having your dad disappearing out of your life, you know, kind of in a snap of a finger. It was hard, and I was angry, but not that kind of anger where I wished anything bad.
Detectives learn that Meg, the only other surviving member of the family, is also named in the will. Could she have anything to do with the murder?
I really felt bad for Meg at that time because I knew Meg, but we had to get some answers. When we approached her about the will, she didn't know about it. She also wanted answers, you know. She loved them, Joe and Beth and Dennis.
She was so bright and intelligent and loving.
Police ask Meg about her relationship with her parents. She says it was good, but she raises one concern.
Officers did learn that Beth and Meg had had some disagreements over some of the people that she was now spending a lot of time with.
One person in particular, Meg's boyfriend, Randy Appleton.
Beth and Joe didn't want him around, so we needed to talk to Randy. Randy became a viable person of interest.
After 3 members of the Wellnitz family are gunned down in their own home, police now have a new suspect, the boyfriend of surviving daughter Meg, 20-year-old Randy Appleton.
Joe didn't go into any details, but he had a concern, I think, of the direction that Meg had taken as far as who she was associating with.
That could be a motive for Randy Appleton.
Detectives asked Randy where he was the night of the murder.
He was leery about talking to us.
Randy tells police he was playing cards with Meg and her friends until 2 a.m. the night of the murder. Then he mentions something that grabs detectives' attention.
We learned that he was interested in firearms. We had learned that he had frequented a firing range.
If the murder weapon had been used at the same firing range where he in fact acknowledged having been, practicing with a 9mm would be a very critical part of the investigation if those shell casings collected from the range matched the murder weapon that was believed to have been used to kill the Wellnitz family.
We're starting to see red flags at this point. Randy was one that liked guns. He did like to go to that firing range and did use a weapon there. We actually ended up going to the firing range and collecting several spent shell casings. All of them were submitted to the crime lab. Our hope was that we could match those rounds through the laboratory to some of the 9mm shell casings that we had located.
2 weeks later, police received the results on the shell casings.
They were not able to find any casings that matched as having been fired from the murder weapon that was used to kill the Wellnitz family.
It was very disappointing that we were unable to tie any of those shell casings to Randy Appleton.
It suggested either that they used a different weapon at the firing range than was used to murder the family, or that it could have been somebody else.
Despite the setback, Randy's love of guns and familiarity with the Wellnitz home means he is still a suspect. Police look to confirm his alibi with those he and Meg claim to have been with the night of the murder, Bill and Regina Meese.
We had to talk to them to see if that was what they were doing, playing cards during the early morning hours, because that was Randy's alibi. Bill was cooperative, where Bill had agreed to talk to us about certain things.
Bill corroborates Randy's alibi.
They were all 4 together playing cards till the early morning hours. He agreed to take a lie detector test. During the process of the polygraph examiner asked him if he knew anything about what happened, if he had any involvement about what happened.
And then his behavior was something that was alarming. It was something that caused some concern with the officers.
He started tearing the stuff off that you put on during a polygraph and just shut it down right then. And then the polygraph was over at that point. So he did not complete the polygraph. He was just very mad. Definitely raised red flags with us that he knows more than he's telling us, and that he's afraid of that polygraph because that polygraph might tell us more than he wants us to know.
Despite his behavior, police have nothing concrete on Bill and are forced to let him go.
We tried to talk to Regina, but Bill did not want us to interview her. He would get very controlling with her. It's over at this point. We were still running down leads. Obviously, you always get leads that you're going to follow. But one of the things that I thought early on was, if we ever get to a point where Regina and Bill are not talking, we need to go back and reapproach her.
Lacking any new developments, months turn into years, leaving detectives and the Wellnitz's loved ones frustrated.
What are we missing? What are we not doing? They're friends of mine, and this was one of those cases that you want to solve before your career is over. It was just like you were at a dead end, and we couldn't figure that out, you know.
When the case went cold, it was very disheartening just knowing that someone had committed this terrible crime and that they may possibly never have to pay for that. I just remember feeling so sad. Beth and Joe were just such a light in our community.
You don't have any answers when it happened. Had no idea of who could have done it or why they would have done it. There was so little information coming out, it just kind of fell to the wayside. It's just sad.
The case remains cold for nearly a decade. But in 2002, detectives decide to take a fresh look at the triple homicide.
This case is still on my mind. I had never forgot it. And I said, okay, what's the condition or what's the status of Bill and Regina? And I learned at that point that they were separated. That was the thing that we were waiting on before, is when this separation occurred, to go see what Regina had to say outside of the control of Bill Meese.
Police track Regina down, and what she has to tell them is shocking.
When we met with Regina in Lexington, she told us that she had proof of who killed the Wellnitzes.
Nine years after the murder of Joe and Beth Wellnitz and their son Dennis, police finally have a break in the case. One of their surviving daughter Meg's best friends, Regina Meese, says she knows who the killer is and has proof.
When we approached her, she immediately said, I've got this piece of evidence. She essentially wanted some assurance that she wouldn't be charged with tampering with evidence. And I assured her that if she in fact turned it over to law enforcement, I didn't think it would even constitute a crime. Now, at that time, we didn't know if she had photographs that perhaps were taken during the commission of the crime. We didn't know if she may have had the firearm that was used in the commission of the crime, or what piece of evidence that she had. But she shared with us that she had in fact retained possession of the fire safe that had been removed from the back closet in the bedroom upstairs of Beth and Joe's home.
When police ask Regina how she got the safe, she says the person who gave it to her is the one who shot the Wellnitzes.
Regina's the one started the ball rolling. Everything started to fall in place. Regina told us that Bill Meese was the one responsible for the death of Dennis and the death of Joe and Beth Wellnitz. It was very shocking, very shocking.
She had been interviewed by the police before, but had been told by her then husband, now ex-husband, not to talk to the police, not to tell them anything. And it certainly appeared, at least, to be a burden lifted that she was able to share this information.
It was a huge deal when we heard what she had to say. That was the part that we needed to happen, and that from there on, it steamrolled from there.
Regina takes police to her home to see the fire safe.
It was the same type and everything that we were missing from the house that night. It was the same measurements, that same dimensions that we had measured when we were in the wellness house and discovered that the safe was missing.
When we later compared the bottom impressions on that fire safe to the imprints taken from the closet, it was a perfect match, and in fact it was the fire safe that was stolen from the wellness home.
Nothing of significant value is found in the safe, but Regina delivers another explosive revelation to police. She tells them that Bill is planning to kill again.
Interviewing Bill Meese's ex-wife, it came to the attention of the police that a mutual friend had had an encounter with Bill Meese where he had offered to kill her boyfriend.
Bill had told her that he would commit this murder for her for $500.
I mean, it was just incredible. It was disturbing.
Was Bill some kind of twisted serial murderer? Police decide to move before he can strike once more.
We initiated this investigation and contacted that lady that Bill had approached.
She agreed to wear a recording device, speak with Bill Meese. He was provided a certain sum of money as a down payment, and the police then arrested him for offering to kill this mutual friend's boyfriend.
With Bill in jail, police question him about the Wellnitz triple homicide.
There was no statements made about the Wellnitz murder that he was willing to make at that time.
When we interviewed him there, I mean, we did not get a confession from him. He denied it at that point. Even though we knew that we were on the right track, it still takes evidence to put this together.
As detectives work on building their case with Bill still in custody, news spreads quickly about his arrest and possible involvement in the shooting of Joe, Beth, and Dennis.
When I first heard about Bill being a suspect, it sent shivers up my spine because I immediately am flooded with the memories of being in junior high with Bill and having very, very strange interactions with him. I was 13, 14 years old. He at one point stabbed me in the leg with a pencil. He had been open about talking about murder and proceeded to threaten me that if I said anything about it, that he'd kill me and my family. I hadn't seen my dad in years when I went to school with Bill. I don't know how they knew each other.
One question remains for police. If Bill murdered the Wellnitzes, what was his motive? Detectives learn another piece of shocking information when Regina tells them Bill might have pulled the trigger, but someone else masterminded the killings.
She did share with us that Meg had been involved in the planning of this murder and that she had wanted it done. Certainly that was shocking to everybody. She said that Meg had ridden with Bill Meese from Lexington down to Columbia late night, early morning when these murders occurred.
Meg was a big part of the planning and execution of the plan at her parents' house. What we also learned is that they had been planning this 3 months prior to the murders before they did it. We believed at this time that Meg and Bill Meese were the ones responsible for the murders. We had ruled out Regina and Randy Appleton at this time. It was a bombshell for us to learn that information. I couldn't believe it. Totally unexpected.
"10 years after Joe, Beth, and Dennis Wellnitz were shot in cold blood, police now believe Meg Wellnitz wanted her parents dead and asked her friend Bill Meese to kill them.
Based upon my prior history with Meg Wellnitz, I would have never dreamed that she would have been involved in that murder of her parents and sibling. She had become that type of person, not the one that I knew from before. And now all of a sudden I see her in a completely different light when she has no compassion for life.
Before they can lay charges, detectives need hard evidence against Meg and Bill.
One of the things that we learned during the investigation, they had purchased a 9mm high-power Browning automatic. We knew they had done that. They used a false ID, and they used it to make the purchase of the gun. We were able to learn that through a report from ATF, and we actually identified who sold that gun to them, and that the person that sold it to them actually identified Meg and Bill as being the ones that came in.
On February 27, 2003, detectives finally have the evidence they need.
This case was presented to an Adair County grand jury, and the grand jury indicted both Meg Wellnitz and Bill Meese.
Meg is arrested at her home in Lexington, but refuses to speak to police. Bill, who is serving a 12-year sentence for the murder for hire plot, is ready to talk.
During his statement, he certainly indicated to us Meg Wellnitz was involved in the planning. This was done at her urging. This was her idea, and that she wanted it done.
We agreed that she wanted to have her parents killed. She claimed the estate was worth $1 million. She would give me 10% of that estate in exchange for killing her parents.
We had the motivation being money. What we learned was that Meg and Bill drove from Lexington that morning down to Columbia, and that Meg gave Bill the key to the front door. She stays in the car. She does not go in the house.
I walked through the house, the back room. Joe came out of the back room. I engaged him, fired on him. He came toward me and I continued firing. He fell. I went upstairs, into the hall. Elizabeth was standing next to her bed. I engaged and fired on her. She fell. I came back down the hall. I entered Dennis's grave. He was sitting on his back. I engaged him. I emptied the magazine of weapons. He was still sitting up at that time. He got on the floor and I shot him. I then went into the back bedroom and into the closet and got the firebox, took the box down in the car, took off the clothes I was wearing. I put all of those items as well as firearm 3 magazines in a black plastic trash bag. I put the black trash bag in the trash container and drove back to that. We got back to like about 6:30 or 7.
It truly was a chilling account of just how cold-hearted he was, not only in doing it, but in talking about it.
Police confront Meg with Bill's confession.
She agreed to then give a statement. When we met with Meg, my observation and my perception of her demeanor and her statements to us certainly was not one of any remorse. It was a matter-of-fact description of what she had done some years prior in having her family killed.
I don't think I could have ever thought of Meg committing a murder or being a part of a murder plan. I know that life insurance might seem like a lot of money, but when you put that cost on lives, it's nothing. Like it's unfathomable to think that she considered their lives that invaluable.
Bill Meese was convicted by a jury of 3 counts of murder, robbery, and burglary, and he was sentenced to death. Meg Wellnitz was convicted of complicity to 3 counts of murder, complicity to robbery, and complicity to burglary, and she received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years.
It's very disturbing to know that this little sweet girl that I remember has been the one that actually played such a big role in this murder. Meg orchestrated one of the most horrendous crimes that you could imagine, killing your mom and dad and also your brother.
I do not think that Meg receiving 25 years was a just sentence. I think she was as guilty as Bill Meese, and I think she should have been given the same type of sentence as Bill Meese, death.
For their daughter to have been the killer was about the most unexpected thing. It was such a shock to try to wrap your head around how could a daughter carry out or be the mastermind. It does not get any more heartless than that, and it does not get any more sickening than that. She didn't deserve to ever be free again.
In 2014, having served 8 years of her life sentence, Meg is found dead in her cell of an apparent suicide.
I certainly could never have imagined that things would have turned out this way. I just feel sad that Joe wasn't able to live out his life the way that he deserved to and continue to give back to the community that he was a part of, and be a father to Dennis and to Meg even. I wish I had gotten to spend more time with him.
It's just hard to understand sometimes why things happen and why they had to lose their lives in that way when they had so much ahead of them. It was a very tragic ending.
The community lost a cherished family. I mean, we miss them as friends. We miss them as part of the community. They were just fine folks.
An outgoing and vivacious mother.
Everybody that met her loved her. She would make like everyday fun.
She was vibrant, happy. She was the life of the party.
Is savagely murdered.
The level of brutality that was involved in the actual murder was just shocking. Her throat was slashed almost to the point where she was decapitated.
Police hunt for an elusive killer.
We had nothing to tell us what happened. Crime scene evidence produced basically nothing.
We couldn't figure out who did it and why they did it. We were really baffled.
Could have been anybody.
And follow a twisted trail of evidence.
Why would he use a calling card?
There were 44 phone calls made up until the day of the murder.
The officer found a loaded handgun and hollow point bullets. It kind of lit up like a light bulb.
Until a desperate move.
This was really the one shot that the police had to solve this case.
Reveals a secret that stuns everyone.
I was very surprised, like I was shocked. All of us were. I never would have expected that it would lead to this.
At 10:27 p.m. on a cold Tuesday in January 2003, Ramapo Police Dispatch receives an emergency call.
Ramapo 911. My neighbor just ran in my house and said his wife is on the floor in the house. He's here and he's sort of like in a state of shock.
Let me talk to him on the phone.
All right, hold on a minute.
Yes. Sir, I have help on the way. You stay right where you are until the officers get there. Do you know if your wife is breathing?
No, she didn't answer me.
Did you check to see if she was
No,
breathing?
I walked into her room, the lights don't go on.
Okay, does she have any injuries?
Yes, she's got blood on her.
Where?
When I cried, Evelyn, she didn't move.
Did you come home and find her that way?
I just came home.
Officers are dispatched to the home, located in a quiet family neighborhood.
When I initially approached the house, I see a man with a young boy with this really blank face. Walking by, he didn't say anything to me. I noticed that he had a shopping bag. It looked like a gallon of milk. I enter the home and go upstairs to the back rear bedroom to give this woman aid, only to find that I was at the scene of a murder. You know, her injuries were so severe. She's clearly dead. She has a very deep laceration to her neck, and she has what appears to be a knife handle sticking out of her chest. And the blood is just pooled around her body. To me, it looked like the blood was still moving. And I was thinking to myself, this just happened. It could be that the killer's still in the house. So myself and another police officer went room by room and cleared the house, and we didn't find anybody else inside. At that point now, I had to secure the crime scene. I knew that it was dark, but once it's a crime scene, you try not to touch anything because you don't know what is evidence.
Detectives arrive on the scene and begin their investigation in the bedroom.
The victim was lying on her back, and she had a tremendously deep wound to her neck. So deep so, you could see part of her spine. There appeared to be 2 stab wounds to her chest, and there was a large, I would call it a kitchen knife, sticking in her chest. We, of course, dusted the knife for fingerprints, which came back negative.
The actual blade had gone through her and was stuck into the parquet wood floor. You know, it was a pretty brutal scene.
She didn't appear to be dead for long. Her body was cold to the touch, but there was no rigor mortis. There was no lividity. We looked at a potential attack of a sexual nature. There was nothing obvious to the eye. Her clothing was not disturbed. I looked for any defensive wounds. If there was a struggle, there'd be some indication on her hands, and none of that was evident.
The brutality of her injuries and how many times she had been stabbed, it looked more like what we would call a crime of passion.
Looking around the room, investigators discover some unusual clues.
I found it kind of odd that there was no lights, but the fan in the ceiling was running. The fan light had no light bulbs in it. And in the garbage basket were 3 light bulbs, and there was 1 on the floor next to it. And I'm like, you know, what's this all about? And there was a wall sconce that had a light bulb that was loosened. To me, it would be indicative of somebody looking to hide their presence, you know, lessen the ability of the victim to see them.
The house was a little bit in disarray, but it didn't look like it had been ransacked or that it was part of a burglary.
There was some expensive tools in the garage. There was quite a bit of silverware, which is a burglar. They would take that, I would think.
Nothing really of value was taken, and so that started raising more questions of what exactly happened here.
Police examine the exterior of the house for evidence.
We didn't see any types of breaks in the windows or the screens. Everything appeared to be locked and secure. On the ground, you could see a set of footprints in the snow that led to the back door. And that door wasn't broken open, but it was open just slightly. That could have been a point of entry for whoever had done this to her.
Investigators speak with the homeowner, Peter Visich. He tells police the victim is his wife, 36-year-old Evelyn Visich, and that they live in the house with their 2-year-old son, Ryan.
Peter told the police he'd gotten home with his son and that he observed that something happened to his wife. When the police spoke to Peter and explained to him what exactly happened to his wife, Evelyn, it was a strange reaction.
He just sort of had a very stale face. That was something that was odd to me, but it certainly didn't point any fingers at him. There was no blood and nothing in his hands or on him or on his clothes that would indicate that he had been part of the murder.
While Peter is taken to headquarters to make a statement, Ryan is looked after by his grandparents. At the crime scene, investigators continue to look for any clues to who has killed Evelyn Visich.
In these early stages, you don't really know the victim, and so now you have to start thinking, who would do that, and what was the reason for this brutality that was leveled against this victim?
Born to a single mother in Lares, Puerto Rico in 1966, Evelyn grew up determined to escape her humble childhood.
She came to this country from Puerto Rico when she was 19 to live the American dream.
Evelyn landed a job at a large home improvement store in Paramus, New Jersey, where she made an immediate impression.
Evelyn was a great employee. She had such a good work ethic. Everybody loved her.
She was vibrant, positive. You could hear Evelyn from a mile away. She was always happy. She loved her music. She was passionate about dancing. She was a proud Latina.
She was beautiful inside and out, such a giving person. She was very kind.
Evelyn started dating Peter after they met at the store.
Peter used to shop there with his father. He was very quiet, very polite, family-oriented. He seemed like a good guy, someone that she could see building a family with. That was her dream.
Peter and Evelyn married and soon welcomed their son Ryan into the family.
Ryan was her world. Everyone knew she had a son, and everyone knew how much she loved her son.
After 4 years of marriage, the couple's relationship deteriorated and Evelyn filed for divorce.
Things started to go wrong. They were just very disconnected. But she wanted Peter to be a part of Ryan's life while they figured out their divorce and custody agreement.
But Evelyn was killed before the divorce was finalized, raising police suspicions due to the nature of her murder.
The ferocity, the level of violence, you would think somebody really had an axe to grind, someone that's personally involved with the victim.
You looked at the nature of the crime, it suggested that it was somebody doing this for a reason. You have a couple who are going through a divorce. In these types of cases, you're going to look at the husband.
Coming up, police discover additional suspects.
We learned that he had been with Evelyn the night of the murder.
Maybe they were having a domestic argument, a dispute.
And unearth hidden evidence.
Evelyn had secretly audio taped some of the arguments and fights that they had been having.
But just as the investigation falters,
maybe he wasn't the one who actually did the murder because it just doesn't make sense.
Was there a piece of the puzzle that we weren't seeing?
A new face blows the case wide open.
He's perspiring heavily. I could see the vein in his neck beating. And I said to him, I said, I don't want to hear what you have to say. I already know what happened, and I'm going to prove it.
Police investigating the murder of mother of one, Evelyn Visage, have their first suspect, her estranged husband, Peter Visage.
You have to start thinking, did the husband do this, or is he involved in it somehow?
Peter mentioned that his relationship with Evelyn was troubling to him because they were in a different place. He wanted her to stay home, she wanted to work, and the relationship deteriorated, and Evelyn had filed for divorce.
Evelyn and Peter still lived in the same home, even though this divorce was proceeding. They slept in separate bedrooms, but they were living under the same roof.
Peter claims he last saw Evelyn alive the morning she was killed.
He had taken his son for the day. Evelyn had gone to work.
Peter told us he went to his mother's house at 8:30 that morning with Ryan to do some household repairs. He didn't have a steady job. His parents supported him. He also did a lot of odd jobs for them that they paid him for. He stayed at his mother's house till approximately 8:30, and at that time he went with his son Ryan to the Palisades Mall.
Peter tells police that just after 9 p.m., he called Evelyn's cell, and she told him she was at a friend's house.
She told Peter that she was on her way home and would probably be home within 20 minutes or so. At approximately 10 p.m., Peter received a telephone call from Evelyn asking where he was. Peter said to Evelyn that he was picking up milk and that he would be home shortly. Peter said that upon arriving home, his intent was to put Ryan to bed, but he said that he found it odd that the lights were not working in the hallway. He said he looked into the bedroom, he saw that Evelyn was on the floor, and he said that she was obviously deceased, according to him, and he ran back downstairs and ran to the neighbor's house to call the police.
Peter Visage was questioned for over 16 hours. I mean, it was a very long interview. He never asked to leave. He never said, you know, I want a lawyer, leave me alone, anything like that. He was cooperative throughout.
He agreed to provide us with fingernail clippings, hair samples, blood sample, a buccal swab for his DNA.
As Peter is providing samples, investigators run a background check.
There was nothing in his history indicative of this violence. Peter was typically a guy who was, if he wasn't home, working on cars, motorcycles, he was at his parents' house. Peter Visage's mother confirmed his alibi for the day and evening at the time that he said that he was there. We found Peter to be at the A&P supermarket buying milk and exiting the store consistent with the times he described, confirmed by video cameras. And he produced a receipt for the milk, time and date stamped 10:15 p.m. The amount of time it took to go from A&P, where he purchased the milk, to his house, it just would not have been possible to commit that crime and call the police from the neighbor's phone and not be contaminated in some sort or leave behind some evidence or have evidence on him. We found no sign of any injuries. We found no sign of any blood on his person, on his shoes.
At this point in the investigation, there was nothing that we could find that was showing that Peter Visage was involved in the murder of his wife. He was in all these different places where there were surveillance cameras, and with a timeline that prevented him from being at the scene of the murder when it occurred. Now you have to start thinking, other than Peter Visage, who could do something like this, and why would they do something like this?
I asked him, did he have any concern about his own safety? You know, somebody came into your house, maybe they were looking for you too. Did he have any enemies? Does he owe anybody money? Does he have any illegal habits, drugs, gambling? And he answered no to all those questions. And I asked him if he knew anybody that might want to do this. And he said that she did have a boyfriend and that we should look at him. Evelyn was dating another employee of Home Depot, Mike Granda.
Here you have people going through a divorce, and now you have a boyfriend thrown into the mix.
A motive could be jealousy, could be a fight in their relationship. The fact that she still lives with Peter could be a source of upsetment for Mike Granda.
Maybe it was a jealous boyfriend who had come in there. It fit the profile for the crime scene, being that it was so horrific.
The next morning, police head to Evelyn's work to interview her boyfriend, Mike, and find that her coworkers already suspect something is wrong.
I remember I kept calling her because Evelyn was always at work by the time I got there, and she wasn't there that day. I saw detectives when they came in, and I got suspicious. And I said, something happened to Evelyn, right? So the detective said to me, how would you know that? So what I said was, you just confirmed it to me.
We interviewed Evelyn's co-workers, and to a person, they all loved her and spoke highly of her. And she had some very close relationships with people that she worked with that loved her dearly, that she was good to them, they were good to her, they looked out for each other.
Evelyn was very, very loved at work. Emotionally, it was horrible. I mean, we were her friends. We were her family.
She wasn't just a friend, she was like a big sister to me.
As investigators speak with Evelyn's coworkers, her boyfriend, Mike Granda, arrives to start his shift.
When Mike Granda arrived for work, we told him that Evelyn had been murdered. He was visibly upset.
But when detectives ask Mike where he was the night before, his answer raises eyebrows.
According to Mike Granda, he had been with Evelyn the night of the murder.
At that point, you have to really look at every possibility. Maybe she was going back to her husband. Maybe she had broken up with him. Maybe it was a crime of passion. Maybe they were having a domestic argument, a dispute. We had to look at him as a possible suspect for the murder.
Police hunting the killer of Evelyn Visage are focusing in on the man she was dating while in the throes of divorcing her husband.
We did look at Evelyn's boyfriend, Mike Granda. There could be a source of jealousy based on the fact that she still lives with her husband during this process, so he has to be looked at.
Detectives bring the 28-year-old to the station for questioning.
When Michael Granda was interviewed, we asked him to describe their relationship. He said initially they were just friends, but as time went on, they became romantically involved and began dating.
Investigators press Mike for details on the night that Evelyn was killed.
According to Mike Granda, Evelyn and he had left Home Depot at approximately 3 p.m. Evelyn had gone to the Garden State Plaza Mall to return some clothes, and she actually was supposed to be having dinner with her son that night. But Peter called Evelyn and said, I'm going to my mother's house with the baby. So Evelyn called Michael saying that she was free, so she went from the shopping mall to Michael Granda's house in West New York, New Jersey.
Mike claims he and Evelyn had dinner. Around 9 p.m., Peter called to say he was on his way back with Ryan, after which Evelyn decided to head home to see her son.
Michael Granda's house is approximately a 40-minute drive to the Visage house. Michael Granda called her when she was approximately 20 minutes from home when she was on the Garden State Parkway. Approximately 40 minutes after that phone call, Evelyn was being murdered. We asked him to describe his whereabouts. He said that he had stayed home for the rest of the night, watched TV, and went to bed. So there was a window of opportunity where he did not have an alibi that could be corroborated by someone else. We subpoenaed his phone records to try to determine where he was. Michael's cell phone records indicated that his cell phone was in his apartment or very close by his apartment in West New York, New Jersey. If he were to drive from West New York, in all likelihood, he would have to pass through a toll. We subpoenaed toll records, Easy Pass records. We subpoenaed some cameras, video records from some banks in the area looking for his car passing by, and none of that was ever found. So that also led us to believe that he was telling the truth. He actually was in his home at the time that Evelyn was being murdered.
I never thought for 1 second that Mike had anything to do with it. Mike really lifted her up on a pedestal. He gave her that support that she needed. Mike made her feel beautiful.
Michael was most cooperative. He offered his phone. He offered his laptop computer. He offered samples of his blood, a buccal swab for DNA, hair. He offered everything. He said, please, I know you have to look at me, cross me off the list and find out who did this.
It just never even dawned on me that the police would look at me. I just tried to give them as much information as I could. I do remember telling them, like, oh, I know you guys have to suspect me. I told them if they wanted to search my house, they could. If they wanted to search my cars, they could. I was just very focused on trying to be helpful.
After the police obtained all of the information from Mike and speaking with him and speaking with others, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect in the murder of Evelyn Visage. And there was just nothing to suggest that Peter Visage was involved. So if you don't believe the husband's involved, you don't believe the boyfriend's involved, you have to look at other individuals that may be involved.
At that point, you know, could have been anybody. You can't make assumptions on who it could be. You have to really look at every possibility.
The day after Evelyn's murder, as police consider possible suspects, news of the crime hits the airwaves.
The Evelyn Visage murder was newsworthy just because of the area.
We're in a small town. We don't have that many murders that it's commonplace.
This was a case that really was troubling because you have a woman who was violently, brutally killed, and we couldn't figure out who did it and why they did it.
Hoping for a new lead, investigators looked to the autopsy report to learn more about the crime.
She had 2 stab wounds in her upper back area. Those were the initial strikes. And then she had a very deep slash wound to her throat. And then there were 2 stab wounds in her upper chest area, powerfully done as indicative by the fact that the knife was stuck in the floor. Based on what the medical examiner described to us, I can only imagine the sheer horror that Evelyn was experiencing.
The level of brutality that was involved in the actual murder was just shocking. Her throat was slashed almost to the point where she was decapitated. It was blood-curdling.
She must have been scared. Somebody's in her home, she's in her bedroom. Maybe it was a burglary gone bad and she came home and had startled whoever was in her house.
We circled back to examining parolees in the area, both New York and New Jersey, sex offenders, people that have committed similar crimes, burglaries gone bad or robberies gone bad. At the time of Evelyn Visage's murder, there was a group of young men who were committing robberies and burglaries in the vicinity, including a Terrence Monk, who lived approximately 5 miles from the Visage residence.
I do remember that we were having burglaries in the area, and I remember that we were having home invasions too. The name Terrence Monk, like it clicked with me.
There were cases, robberies, burglaries, and assaults where Terrence Monk committed violent acts on people that didn't cooperate. He was also implicated in a robbery probably 1.5 miles from the Visage house. It kind of lit up like a light bulb. He certainly went right up to the top of the list.
Evelyn Visage was killed in her own bedroom in a frenzied knife attack. And now, police are investigating if a violent local burglar might be responsible.
Terrence Monk was like a known criminal, and the detectives had been dealing with him for years at that point.
We had been investigating him so arduously, and for such a long time, there was not any possibility of cooperation on his behalf.
To get the information they need, investigators take a different approach.
I utilized a confidential informant to try to determine where Terrence Monk was and if, in fact, he was involved in this crime. He described to me where Terrence Monk was at the time that Evelyn was murdered. He told us that Terrence Monk was in Buffalo, New York, and that was substantiated by witness statements and his cell phone records.
It's another dead end for detectives. They press the informant for any other information that might help solve the case.
This young man was so plugged in the criminal community, so I asked him what the word on the street was. If it was a local guy, chances are, in the criminal community, somebody would have been talking. And he said there's nothing on the street at all. No information about who killed Evelyn Visage.
With no other leads, police re-canvassed the neighborhood around the Visage home.
There was multiple attempts to locate witnesses, and detectives actually went back and conducted a road stop in the area, hoping that somebody may have seen something. Nothing was discovered, and we couldn't gain anything from that. In the village of Chestnut Ridge, it's prohibited to park a vehicle on the street at night. So we also checked to see if any parking tickets had been issued or any vehicles parked on the street, and there were none found.
Collectively, between the police and the prosecution, we were really sitting there thinking this may never get solved.
While investigators consider their next move, Evelyn's loved ones struggle to accept her loss.
I just couldn't believe that she was killed. Evelyn was such a loved person by everyone. Something like that happening to her, it makes no sense.
You know, there's some people that come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. That's what they say. There was a lot of respect and love there.
She would make like everyday fun, always laughing, having a good time. But, you know, that's life. I mean, you have to take every second you get because you never know when it's going to end.
Detectives re-interview Evelyn's friends and colleagues, hoping to uncover a tiny detail that leads them to her killer.
We did speak to many of Evelyn's friends to find out if she had a lifestyle that was potentially dangerous to her or would expose her to this type of demise.
Her life revolved around her being a mother.
She had no enemies.
Everybody that met her loved her. There was not one person that met her that did not instantly take to her. She was just a really pleasant person to be around all the time, day and night.
It was very puzzling. What happened and why was this done?
With a violent killer still on the streets, concern spreads through the community.
In this area, this little hamlet of Chestnut Ridge, it's just not that kind of an area where you would expect anything like this. People in the community are starting to get fearful.
I remember I was living alone, and I certainly had my radar up, and I was very careful coming and going, almost to the point of paranoia. I wasn't going to be a victim.
3 days after Evelyn's murder, detectives receive explosive new information, turning the investigation on its head.
Mike Granda came to the Round Pole police station with some personal items of Evelyn Visage's. Amongst those personal items, we found audio tapes and a journal that she wrote in.
Detectives immediately recognized the voices on the audio tapes as Evelyn and her husband, Peter.
Evelyn apparently had secretly audio taped some of the arguments and fights that they had been having. Everything from any money that she spent, taking the car away from her, shutting off her phone. He wanted to be completely in control of Evelyn, so it was in stark contrast to what Peter described to us. The fact that Peter didn't describe any turmoil caused us to have some doubts about how truthful he was being.
Evelyn's journal contains even more startling revelations about their divorce.
He wanted custody. He was told that he wasn't going to get full custody, and he wanted the sale of the house. So if Evelyn is gone, he's got the child, he's got the sale of the house, and he can move on.
When detectives try to follow up with Peter about these revelations, they're met with silence.
At this point, Peter had retained an attorney, and we were no longer able to question him. So that again raised some suspicion. We went back and looked harder at Peter, based on the fact that he had the most to gain from Evelyn being dead.
With Peter having an ironclad alibi, investigators consider other scenarios.
Maybe he wasn't the one who actually did the murder, but you have to wonder if somehow Peter is involved in this, because it just doesn't make sense that anybody else had a reason to do this.
The suspicion is enough to get a warrant to search Peter's vehicle.
We had no idea at the time that that search of the van was about to unleash a whole new avenue of this investigation and turn this case totally upside down.
New evidence in the Evelyn Visage homicide investigation has led police to revisit her husband, Peter, as a potential suspect, and they are now searching his vehicle for any trace of incriminating evidence.
You just never know what might be that little piece. You know, whether it's a hair or a fingerprint or that one bit of DNA might be the break in the case.
Desperate for any lead in their investigation, police make a critical discovery.
There was an extensive search of Peter's van, and we uncovered in the back pocket of the middle seat of the van $3,700 in cash in a white envelope. In addition to the money that was found, there was a Sprint calling card.
This was tremendous, tremendous evidence that we have just now uncovered. It offered a lot of questions.
Why would a person have $3,700 cash? We examined Peter's financial status. At the time, Peter was not very solvent in terms of having any money. Somebody who's, by all accounts, broke, and he's got $3,700 in the back of his van. And of course, we couldn't ask him why, because he had already retained counsel.
You have to now start wondering, why does this man have $3,700 in $100 bills left behind in his minivan?
It's possible that Peter may have engaged someone to kill Evelyn, and that money was going to be used to pay off the final payment.
Furthest thing from my mind was that a hitman could have been hired. That's really very rare in real life. Let's look at his bank accounts, his credit card statements, you know, things like that, as far as getting any solid evidence he was involved in this.
We went back and looked harder at Peter's bank accounts, stock market, anything like that, in an effort to see if he had taken any money out to try to pay somebody to maybe do this, and nothing was found to be out of the ordinary or even considered to be like a payoff.
Finding no evidence Peter paid to have Evelyn killed, detectives focus on the other item found in his van.
Why would he use a calling card? Most folks, unless you don't have a cell phone or don't have a landline, don't have the necessity for a calling card. And Peter had a cell phone, he had a home phone, so we subpoenaed the records for that calling card.
There were 44 phone calls made from that prepaid phone card records beginning in November of 2002 up until the day of the murder in January of 2003.
Of 44 calls made on that card, almost all of them were made to an individual named Frank Thon.
The name is new to detectives, but when they run it through the police database, they make a telling discovery.
Police learned that Frank Thon was currently, at the time, in jail in the state of New Jersey.
This is a man who's been arrested numerous times, assaults, violent assaults. His most recent arrest was for driving while intoxicated. The officer found a loaded handgun underneath the armrest of the truck and hollow point bullets. At the time of the murder, he was on intensive supervised parole. Shortly after the Visage homicide, Frank Thon turned himself in to serve a year in the county jail.
Could there be an innocent explanation why Peter called a known violent criminal for months leading up to the murder, only to stop the day Evelyn was killed?
We subpoenaed Frank Thon's phone records. Analyzing his phone records, we found that he was in the vicinity of the Visage home on January 6th, the day before the murder, and on January 7th, the day of the murder. Then it became really evident to us that he was involved in this.
So now things are starting to click. We were able to secure a search warrant to search Frank Thon's apartment. And one of the things that the police recovered was a computer. Upon forensic investigation of that computer, we found that Frank Thon had searched directions from his apartment to the Visage home.
The evidence is compelling, but investigators need something more concrete to lay charges.
Based on the evidence that we had, it still was a very weak case. We don't have any forensic evidence that would connect him to the murder of Evelyn Visage.
You need the probable cause, you need the connection to prove your case and to actually have it stick.
With little else to go on, detectives make a bold decision.
We had no other option other than to go at Frank Thon. We knew our case would depend upon Frank Thon making a confession.
This was really the one shot that the police had to solve this case. It was a huge gamble because if he decided to ask for a lawyer, they could not question him anymore. If he denied it, they were stuck with what he had to say.
Police can only hope that Frank reveals the truth of whether Peter was involved in the murder.
We don't have a case against Peter. We're getting closer to figuring out maybe what occurred, but again, it doesn't prove that Peter Visage had any relationship to this murder.
We had nothing other than just the fact that Peter is calling Frank Thon. This case is going to rise and fall, whether we succeed or not with an interview.
Investigators head to the county jail to confront the hardened criminal.
I specifically requested a small room where we could have the table against the wall, and we deliberately set that room up to increase Frank Thon's anxiety. We had lawyer boxes with Evelyn Visage's name on the boxes. We had maps with pins in them. The small office was full of, as I call it, a number of props.
With everything in place, police bring in 41-year-old Frank Thon.
They took the handcuffs off him, and we pretty much just stared at him for like a good minute or two, again, in an attempt to increase his anxiety. And he was visibly nervous. And I said to him, I said, I don't want to hear what you have to say. I already know what happened, and I'm going to prove it. And I'm going to tell you what, a murder for hire in New York, you could potentially face the death penalty. We told him that we had all types of evidence implicating him, and his face hit the table. He's perspiring heavily. His heart rate was obviously increased. I could see the vein in his neck beating. And I said to him, I said, you don't have any friends in this world right now. I said, if you tell us the truth, we'll try to assist you in getting the best possible deal. There was a long pause. He took a big sigh, and then he began to tell us what happened.
"4 weeks after the murder of Evelyn Visage, investigators have just convinced suspected hitman Frank Thon to start talking.
He almost had a look of detachment from what was going on. He took a big sigh and he says, all right, I'll tell you guys what happened. Frank Thon told us that he was the person who killed Evelyn.
Frank Thon confessed not only to the murder of Evelyn Visage, but that he was hired by her husband, Peter.
I really was surprised after everything was said and done, after all of the investigative leads, that it all came back to Peter.
Frank tells detectives that he was introduced to Peter 3 months ago through a mutual acquaintance.
Peter asked this gentleman if he knew of anybody that could take care of his wife. Frank Thon requested $10,000 cash, with $5,000 being paid up front. We later learned that Peter obtained money from a friend of a friend on a loan. A short time after that, Peter Visage met Frank Thon at a pizzeria where Peter gave Frank the down payment of $5,000 cash. I looked at the money found in the van as this could have been the final payment.
To hear that for such a small amount of money that somebody was willing to go out there and kill someone, I was shocked and disgusted.
In his confession, Frank describes Peter's impatience to have Evelyn killed.
He told me that he had a second envelope ready. He was really pushing it.
Peter Visage was pestering him to get this done, so he decided January 7th was going to be the night.
Frank meets Peter at the Visage home the day before the murder.
He told me to lay out of the house and I'd be able to walk to the back of the house and he would leave a door unlocked for me.
Peter told Frank that he would leave the back door open, and he gave Evelyn's schedule for that day.
The next day, Peter establishes his alibi.
He went to his mother's house and then the shopping mall and then stopping to get milk. He knows that there's video cameras. He knows that he's going to get a receipt. That's all adding time to his alibi that can also be substantiated.
After sunset, Frank enters the Visage house and removes the light bulbs to lie in wait for Evelyn in the dark.
Garage door open. Then I heard the house door open. Then I heard her coming up the stairs, and that's when I came out of the room.
He had a gun. He pushed her into the bedroom, had her kneel on the bed, and he told her he was merely here to do a robbery and he wasn't going to hurt her. He said he then took a knife that he had brought with him and stabbed her twice in the back.
She dropped to her knees from the bed. She slid down. And now what do you do? I took her by the forehead from behind her. Yeah. I sliced in, then I sliced back. I heard her bleed. Scratched the bone. I recognized the sound. She dropped immediately to my right on the floor. I heard the air leaving her body. I stabbed her 2 or 3 more times in the chest.
Did you leave the knife behind?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you leave it?
Stuck in the chest.
Frank Thon was the instrument of Evelyn's death. But Peter Visage brought that instrument into his own home.
On Valentine's Day, 2003, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Peter Visage.
Police rush to take Peter into custody.
I said, Peter, I have very good news for you. He said, what's that? He was somewhat befuddled. I said, we found out who killed your wife. And he became like almost giggly. He's like, really, who? I said, you did, expletive. You're under arrest.
It angers me and it pains me to think that the person that she married was the one that did that to her. It's shocking. It's sad.
I was very surprised. Like, I was shocked. All of us were.
He went through this elaborate murder, and I just thought, like, how pathetic are you as a person?
Frank Thon pleads guilty for his role in the murder of Evelyn.
In exchange for his cooperation, he was promised a sentence of 20 years to life if he testified truthfully at the trial of Peter Visage.
In November of 2003, in front of a packed courtroom, Peter stands trial for plotting to murder Evelyn.
Evelyn's friends and family were throughout the trial present. They had to endure really gut-wrenching testimony, particularly when Frank Thon testified.
He said that he told her at the end, I'm going to put you out of your misery. And your husband was the one that hired me. She was just in shock.
Peter Visage never takes the stand during the 8-day trial.
He showed no emotion the whole entire trial.
I would look at him and then just think to myself, like, why you had to get to that point? Why did you do it?
After hearing the evidence, the jury deliberates for only 3 hours.
The jurors announced that they did have a unanimous verdict, guilty on each and every count, including murder in the first degree, which carried a life without parole sentence.
We all screamed. We were relieved, and we felt like justice had been served, although it was bittersweet.
It's just so hard to comprehend why. Now the child doesn't have a mom or dad.
What he did to Ryan is just as unforgivable as what he did to Evelyn, because he deprived Ryan of one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my life. I've never met anyone like Evelyn.
For those closest to Evelyn, she remains alive in their hearts.
Evelyn is still here with us. She's still in our spirit. She was full of love. She was full of life. She was the life of the party.
She was always happy. And if you weren't happy next to her, she will make you happy. She was a good soul. She was a good person. She will always be missed.
I remember working at the pub and started hearing rumours.
Mum, dad, 2 children slaughtered in their own home.
Massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family.
This was an all-out slaughter of 4 people.
No one really knew what had happened, how it had happened, or why it had happened.
Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal?
A family wiped out and a man going missing leaves a community asking questions.
Detectives were left pondering, was this missing persons case linked to a quadruple murder case?
There was a point in this inquiry I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all.
You didn't feel safe in the village?
Police were playing catch-up.
I can't think of another crime of this magnitude in the history of Northamptonshire Police.
In the beautiful Northampton countryside lies the quaint village of Wootton.
It's really lovely. Everyone knows everyone, so it's really chatty, really friendly. Yeah, it is nice, especially to have kids around here.
I love it. I know it's an old village. The church is very, very old, and we're in a conservation area, so people around here are very, very friendly. People have lived here for a long time. There are some families in the village who've been in the village a long, long time, so I think it says an awful lot. Very easygoing, yeah. Good community.
Wootton has a great community spirit. It has a lot of buildings, facilities, open space, considering it's an urban parish. There's the new building, Wootton Fields and Simpson Manor, and then there's the old village, which has got all its old traditional spirit with the church and the old village hall. You've got the Yeoman of England pub in the village, Working Men's Club, you've got a community centre, they put on events, they do a food market every Saturday. Everyone helps each other out, everyone looks out for each other.
So Wootton was the perfect place for Jeff and Helen Ding, originally from East China, to raise their 2 daughters, Zing and Alice.
Jeff was a university lecturer up in Manchester, very educated man in the science field. Helen worked at the local school teaching languages. They had 2 daughters, Zing, also known as Nancy, and then had a younger daughter, Alice, of whom Nancy was very protective.
Family life was busy, especially as Jeff split his week between home and his work at Manchester Metropolitan University.
I believe Jeff was a senior lecturer here, specialisms in polymers, so synthetic materials. His teaching was at first-year level. We all pride ourselves, giving support to our students, but Jeff really took that to a fantastic level. He spent most of his time with students, helping out with various problems that they might have with their studies, for instance. He was actually a hall warden in a halls of residence just on campus. I don't think I ever saw him once lose his temper or ever have any issues with staff. Very easy to get on with.
The Ding's eldest daughter, 18-year-old Zing, was an accomplished musician and preparing to go to university.
Zing came over as being very self-assured, very calm, very capable. She had a wicked sense of humour, and she was quite a live wire. But she managed to be friendly to everybody she met. She was good at everything. She was a remarkable student at school, and she'd already accepted a place at Nottingham University to study medicine.
Like her sister, 12-year-old Alice was also a keen musician.
Alice was quite bubbly. She had one of those smiles that would light up any room. A bit of a cheeky smile, but she was absolutely delightful. Very outgoing. You could tell she was the whole package as a violinist. I think both of the girls had a very strong work ethic, and no doubt that come down to them from their parents.
Both Jeff and Helen worked tirelessly to create a warm and inviting home for their daughters and their friends.
Really welcoming. You could literally turn up and they would invite you in for dinner. They were just such a good family. Like, you would want your kids to be friends with them because they were just the best.
They all seemed very happy and very settled. They loved that family home as well. You know, that was a place they really liked to be. And it is a very nice neighbourhood, I have to say.
But this neighbourhood will never be the same after one fateful bank holiday in 2011.
It was a big holiday weekend. We'd had the royal wedding.
When William and Kate got married, the whole of the parish here was alive with street parties, Union flags everywhere, bunting, a lot of celebration. It was a super happy place.
I was actually working in the pub on the royal wedding. We opened early for it. Not many people actually came in because loads of people around the village were actually throwing street parties.
As the bank holiday weekend comes to a close, neighbours of the Ding family become concerned as they haven't been seen all weekend.
One of the family was due to attend something and they didn't turn up. And then a neighbour went round to see if they were okay and see where they were. The house was in relative darkness, no reply at the front door. That neighbour, thankfully, was a little bit persistent and went round to the back of the house.
Peering through the kitchen window, the neighbour glimpses what appears to be a body on the floor.
The police are alerted and clearly force entry to the premises.
As the officers enter the house, they discover not one, but two bodies.
Jeff is slumped by a radiator in the kitchen with multiple stab wounds. Helen is by the entrance door between the hall and the kitchen, and she's got multiple stab wounds.
The officers head upstairs and step into a harrowing scene.
Alice and Zing were up in the bedroom. The two girls are on the bed and they've both received a number of fatal stab wounds. You know, it was pretty horrendous.
With 4 members of the same family dead, detectives' first instinct is that the culprit could be amongst the deceased.
Nobody knows the reason that this family have ended up dead. One possible scenario is, and it does happen, is the murder-suicide aspect where a family member has, for whatever reason, killed the other family members and then taken their own life.
With such a heavy police presence, rumours quickly spread across the village.
I remember working at the pub at the time and started hearing rumours, customers coming in saying something really bad had happened, but we were all still unsure of the extent of what had happened.
I first heard through a friend who I live near locally, whose daughter was very good friends with one of the young ladies. So it was horrific locally to everybody. The fact that the family had been there for a while and been not discovered was horrific, and just a massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family. I wouldn't like to speculate on people's opinions, but to me personally, it felt a bit targeted.
Little did the villagers of Wootton know the scale of the crime that's been committed on their doorstep.
The murder of the Dean family was probably one of the most horrendous crimes I've ever been asked to.
In the village of Wootton, police have discovered a family of 4 dead. Detective Superintendent Glyn Timmins is put in charge of the investigation.
I was at home on Sunday the 1st of May, enjoying the bank holiday weekend, and my colleague alerted me to the fact that he'd been called to the scene of potentially a multiple murder scene.
46-year-olds Jeff and Helen Ding and their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Zing and 12-year-old Alice, have all suffered fatal knife wounds.
I think what you're trying to do initially is you're trying to rationalise it in terms of what's a likely motive. Why would a family be murdered? You could be looking for a crazed, maniacal killer who's randomly struck at a household. You could be looking for aggravated burglars where it's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal? You never stop searching your mind for options and potential and possibilities.
In Wootton, the heavy police presence has drawn in local reporter Daniel Owens.
It was around about 10 o'clock on the Sunday night when I first arrived on the scene. There was no information coming from the police. We couldn't speak to officers who were inside the house. All we were getting was the people outside guarding the scene, and they weren't telling us anything. I met a couple of lads down there who knew the family vaguely, and they seemed quite upset at what they'd heard. And there were theories doing the rounds that it was potentially a murder-suicide situation. When you have a man and a woman dead in the same house, one killed the other, turned the knife on himself, etc. And that was certainly something that we expected to be exploring.
But in a fast-moving investigation, it's quickly established that the culprit isn't likely to be one of the family.
Clearly, because of the violence that had been used, it was just obvious to the officers that this was an all-out slaughter of 4 people. The big demand at that stage is, well, there are 2. The first one is the preservation of the scene and to make sure that you extract and harvest every centimetre of forensic evidence that you can get hold of. And the other one is to start thinking about who's done this and why.
With a murderer in their midst, police are also aware that villagers could be at risk.
The overriding factor in terms of the community is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear that it might happen again, fear that there's a killer on the loose, that their homes and their loved ones and their families aren't safe.
Police held a press conference and details started to emerge, and we knew this was a story that we'd never seen the likes of before.
For villagers, the news turns what was a happy bank holiday to celebrate the marriage of Prince William and Kate into a tragic event on their own doorstep.
When everybody's enjoying a day, and it was a beautiful day, it's hard to believe that something so vicious can happen. We were just stunned, really stunned. You can't believe it, because you cannot understand, A, why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Well, I was walking to my grandparents and I saw there was a bit of commotion going on the street. I was about 2 streets away. So, yeah, it was very weird. I don't think I wanted to leave the house for a while. I think it made everyone a bit more cautious about what was going on.
People were very on edge. I mean, I wouldn't walk on my own anywhere. I think you didn't feel safe in the village anymore. You don't ever feel like something like that's ever going to happen in a little village.
I was absolutely devastated. I really could not get my head around it. It was a very, very sad day. Not just for me, but for all of my colleagues, for the whole community that we work in here.
As the community mourns, police need to establish exactly when the Ding family were killed.
The initial response is pretty much routine. You're starting to set up initial house-to-house inquiries, you know, not structured formal ones, but sort of people knocking doors. Have you seen anything strange or suspicious? You know, has there been any screams, shouts, noises?
But the neighbours haven't seen or heard anything.
Effectively, we've got 4 people who've been slaughtered in their own home and very little else by way of information.
As each member of the family is examined, it's apparent that whoever was responsible carried out a frenzied attack.
The results of the post-mortem showed the true extent of the brutality involved. The family were subjected to a total of 51 stab wounds between them, with Jeff and his wife killed in the kitchen and the girls killed upstairs in their bedroom trying to hide from their killer.
In the house, a possible murder weapon is found. It's been cleaned and left on the kitchen worktop. And as police comb the scene for clues, they find a puzzling item in the Ding's letterbox. It's a calling card from West Midlands Police, and it's been left just hours before the bodies were discovered.
The visit took place on the Sunday morning, quite early on. Obviously, no reply at the front door, but it's early on a Sunday morning. Not unreasonable for people to be in bed. It's a bank holiday weekend. The officers got no reply.
Why had the police visited the Dings' home early that morning? Who did they want to speak to? And was this in some way connected to their murders?
Someone I'd worked with previously was a detective superintendent in West Midlands. He rang me to say, was I aware of this missing persons inquiry?
Police had visited the Dings in relation to a missing persons inquiry, that of 52-year-old An Zhangdu.
An Zhangdu was a native of China and came over here in the late 90s with his wife, and he ran a herbal medicines business, which he ran with the Ding family for some time.
An Zhang had left his home on the bank holiday Friday, 2 days before his business partners, the Ding's bodies, were discovered.
An Zhangdu left his wife at home watching the wedding while he boarded a train to Birmingham, where he went into his business premises.
He was going to open up the shop, albeit a bank holiday, albeit Kate and William's wedding. He'd gone in to do some work. When An Zhangdu didn't return from work, his wife, she started to become concerned about him, where he might be, what state he was in.
It was totally out of character for him, and she was tearing her hair out with despair at where he was.
At some point later in that day, she reported him as a missing person to West Midlands Police.
An Zhang's wife also described the night before he went missing, and an unexpected knock at their door late at night.
Court officers turned up at An Zhangdu's house and served court document. The ultimate outcome of the service of that court process would have resulted in bankruptcy for Mr. Du and his family. Mr. Du did not sleep that night. He was pacing up and down. He was clearly angry, agitated. It really had disturbed him.
The missing persons inquiry was raised on the Saturday, and as part of that investigation, police attended An Zhangdu's business premises in Birmingham, where they found a note, effectively saying goodbye to his wife.
Leaving a note and with no contact for 4 days, police consider the possibility An Zhang has taken his own life.
Clearly, you know, in terms of mindset, in terms of where he was at mentally at that stage, that would ring significant alarm bells for both, obviously, his wife and the police investigating his disappearance.
Police want to know, what was An Zhangdu's fate? Could he also have been a victim of the Ding's killer?
What detectives were left pondering was whether the missing persons case was now linked to a quadruple murder.
But what detectives uncover next points not only to An Zhang's fate, but also a motive for murder.
There was this legal dispute over business between the two families, and that there was a strong possibility that something had led to a coming together of Mr. Du on the one side and the Ding family on the other.
The quiet village of Wootton has been shocked by the mass murder of the Ding family. University lecturer Jeff, language teacher Helen, and their daughters Zing and Alice. All 4 have been found stabbed to death.
Wootton was not an area affected by crime, yet all of a sudden the world's media descended on their doorstep. It went from 0 to 60 in seconds.
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish, and suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. It was shocking that actually somebody had murdered somebody in our village, and it's suddenly all over the world. On the BBC, for want of a better word, suddenly Wootton is there. It's just bizarre.
It's just a normal village that people come to and live or work or whatever. Just a normal village. When we heard what happened, how it happened, you can't believe it because you cannot understand why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Police have linked another investigation to the Dings murder, that of a missing persons inquiry for former business partner An Zhang-du. He disappeared just days before the family of 4 were found, and it's been discovered that both families were at war.
An Zhang-du and his wife had been involved in a bitter legal dispute with the Dings since 1999. It had been rumbling on for a long time. This relates to a breakdown in a business relationship.
This falling out resulted in a 10-year legal battle, which culminated in a late-night visit from lawyers.
Du and his wife had been served with a court injunction ordering them to repay £88,000, which forced them into a financial black hole and near bankruptcy.
This is a man that's completely at 6s and 7s. He's been knocked completely off his axis in terms of his future and what's going to happen to him.
Du clearly felt massively aggrieved. He'd put his life's work into this business and had it torn from underneath him, really.
That's when the bells start ringing and you've got the basis of a real solid motive for homicide.
Police believe An Zhang-du's anger at being summoned to pay the Dings an £88,000 settlement makes him a prime suspect. But they have yet to find any evidence which connects him to the crime.
What we would have to do is put Mr. Du at the scene of the murders.
All eyes turn to tracking An Zhang-du's movements on the day he went missing. He's first spotted on CCTV at his business in Birmingham.
He left the shop probably within 10 or 15 minutes of having arrived there.
He's next seen heading to a train station.
We traced him to New Street, so therefore we knew which train and platform he was on.
An Zhang-du then boards a train to Northampton.
There's CCTV footage of him on an escalator at Northampton bus station. So we know he transferred from the train station to the bus station. We then know that he got onto a bus that went to Wootton Village, and there is CCTV of An Zhang-du actually asking the driver of that bus for directions. Obviously, he was trying to establish where Jeff and Helen's house was in Pioneer Close.
So if you see down the road, and you see the bus stop just down the road, that's where he came off the bus to come into the village. He got off and he came down this way, and I think went into the local store and asked for directions. So why would you think if somebody's asking you directions that there's anything the matter? You just think he's going to meet friends on that special day.
This represents a significant milestone in both inquiries. The person at the heart of the missing persons case, An Zhang-du, has been placed in the vicinity of the Dings family home on the day they were murdered.
So we're now putting him closer and closer to the scene, and subsequently we have the sighting of a gentleman of Chinese appearance stood outside the Ding family household, probably about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 29th. So it's getting more and more and more likely that that person is An Zhang-du.
Now a prime suspect in the murder of a family of 4, police need to find out where he went next. But then the trail goes cold. An Zhang-du isn't seen on CCTV either leaving the area on foot or by bus.
There was an understandable level of fear among neighbours. 4 of their friends, including 2 young children, had been killed, and the person responsible hadn't been apprehended. He was on the loose. Where was he? Would he return? Would he do it again?
With days since the murders took place and no idea where the suspect could be, detectives examine every possible angle.
He's already got a 2-day head start on us. What we discovered in house-to-house routine inquiries is that the Ding family, their family car had gone in for service, and as a result they'd been given a hire car or a courtesy car to run around in, and that car was not at the Ding family household.
Police were now able to issue a name and a picture of their main suspect with a warning not to approach him in any circumstances. They revealed the car he was driving, and the country was put on alert to help find this man who was wanted in connection with 4 brutal murders.
The manhunt for An Zhang-du puts all forces across the UK on alert.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 in the village of Wootton, Northampton, have released information on a man wanted for questioning. 52-year-old Chinese national An Zhang-du was last seen 4 days ago, driving a silver Vauxhall Corsa. Members of the public are being advised not to approach him.
The pressure's immense, and it's a responsibility not just on your own professional reputation, but, you know, there's a community out there who expects the police to capture somebody who's this dangerous.
Key to tracking An Zhang-du is using automatic number plate recognition cameras.
We were hoping that modern technology such as ANPR, which is a very, very standard form of police inquiry, would help us out in that situation.
After multiple inquiries, a lead comes in. The stolen car's number plate triggered a camera on the night of the murders at a service station just outside Northampton on the M1.
And it showed that that vehicle, that hire vehicle, had been there at about 9:45 on the evening of the 29th. And An Zhang-du had been in to buy some chocolate or a drink, and importantly, a map book.
But where An Zhang is going, detectives don't know. ANPR cameras are checked, and there's no sign of the stolen car on any road in the UK. An Zhang-du has vanished.
At this point, police had no idea of An Zhang-du's whereabouts. Was he dead? Was he alive? Was he even in the UK?
While the manhunt intensifies, the Ding's friends and family are trying to come to terms with what's happened.
There was great sorrow from the students, especially those who were close to him doing projects and so on with him. A great sense of shock and sorrow that someone that helped them so much, of course, now is no longer with us.
For Zing and Alice's friends, meeting at their first county orchestral practice is a traumatic time.
It affected many of the other students very deeply. At orchestral rehearsals in the following week, flowers were left on their chairs. You know, teaching is one thing, but no one can prepare you for... How does a teacher cope with this? I don't know. No one prepares you for that.
For Jeff's family, struggling with the loss is only compounded by the grief of not knowing why this happened.
Actually, I first learned from the internet news, and I was completely shocked. I even cannot finish the news. Okay, once I saw the picture, I just, I cannot believe there's a 4 members all gone. It's just complete shock. Okay, and then I think about my parents. If I cannot, I manage that, think about the parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, on one day.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 from Northampton have said they're concentrating their inquiries in London after a car stolen from the property was found parked near the Edgware Road.
After weeks of searching, the police get their first lead on their hunt for An Zhang-du, and it's created major problems for the investigation.
Unfortunately for us, Mr. Du, in his stolen hire car, managed to get all the way to St John's Wood in London without triggering a single police ANPR system. There was a point in this inquiry I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all. Because not only did he miss ANPR, but when that car's parked in a side street in St John's Wood, the car is ticketed 9 times in 11 days. So we're now 13 days behind there. That's a significant problem in an investigation, because if you can go more or less anywhere in the world in 2 days, the world is literally your oyster in 13.
Whilst Do could be anywhere in the world, police concentrate their search in London.
Anyone who's been to London knows how easy it is to become anonymous in a city of that size and what opportunities there are to disappear within various communities. Obviously that was a huge concern to us, because if Aung San Suu Kyi wanted to lie low, then there's no finer place for him to do that and become anonymous and not be troubled too much. We're back to needle in a haystack time.
House-to-house inquiries uncover CCTV footage of Aung San Suu Kyi abandoning his stolen car in the early hours of the Friday night. Which reinforces detective suspicions that he's still in the area. The investigation moves to Chinatown in London's West End, and officers hand out wanted posters.
Obviously, language is an issue, although clearly most of the Chinese community within those areas will speak English. I think the most difficult cultural barrier is a natural reluctance to become involved with the police. And some people, you know, even thought it was bad luck to put posters in shop windows and things like that. So, you know, you've got to overcome those, but all you can do is reach out and engage and try and gain their confidence, but it certainly doesn't make it easier.
Whilst he's made it to London, police intel suggests that Aung San Suu Kyi wouldn't have gone far.
He was described to us as somebody innocuous, someone who probably would struggle to find his way round of his own volition, you know.
Little did police know just how wrong this intel would prove to be.
Du had made his way through France and Spain and had been seen getting on a ferry from Tangier to Morocco. He'd also been stopped at a border in Algeria. With multiple sightings, this had now become an international manhunt.
Police hunting for a man suspected of murdering a family of 4 from Wootton Village in Northamptonshire have put out a reward of £25,000 for information which could lead to his arrest. Detectives say there have been over 380 sightings of Aung San Suu Kyi across Europe, but the 52-year-old has now been missing for almost a year.
Having reviewed over 5,000 hours of CCTV footage and interviewing over 2,000 people, police have discovered that Aung San Suu Kyi is no longer in the country.
It's a mind-blowing thought, because literally there are 6 billion people in this world. Where do we start? Which country do we start with? You're just thinking, oh my goodness, where do we go from here?
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish. And suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. This guy had come into our parish, he'd committed these dreadful murders, and then he was running off around the world where they couldn't find him. It put Wootton for a while in the news.
It was strange having Wootton put out there like that.
Through CCTV analysis, police have uncovered Aung San Suu Kyi's journey from Wootton to London and then onwards.
He took a coach to the coast and then over to Paris, then onwards to a Spanish port. And the long and short of it is, by the time the police became aware of the bodies, he was out of the country. He's gone.
The police reach out to forces around the world and decide to travel to Spain.
Detectives had issued an appeal on the Spanish version of Crime Watch, and that appeal went out far and wide across the country.
That broadcast was seen also in Morocco, and my understanding is that as a result of that, a supervisor or foreman on the building site where Ang Sang-do had been working as a labourer. He alerted the local authorities, and the local authorities arrested Ang Sang-do after something like 14 months of being on the run.
Yeah, I remember when they caught him, I remember thinking, how on earth did he get there? Unnoticed and working, actually. How is he working? It shows they don't have the same laws that we have here about working. But yes, it was great. It was a good feeling to know he'd been caught.
I remember when the news broke out that he was being extradited back to the UK to be charged for the murders. Everyone felt like justice was finally going to be done.
But even though Ang Sang-do is safely locked up in a Moroccan jail, it's another 6 months before he's returned to the UK and charged with 4 counts of murder. It's taken over 2 years, but the trial into the murders of 4 members of the Ding family begins at Northampton Crown Court.
Surprisingly, Do pleaded not guilty in the court case. His version of events was that he'd gone round there to simply talk to the Do family and things had spiralled out of control.
The issue for this trial was not so much whether he killed the Ding family, it's whether he did it as a murderer of sound mind or whether there was some kind of diminished element.
The court hears how on the 29th of April 2011, Ang Sang-do was furious after he received a court order after a lengthy legal battle with Jeff and Helen Ding. His assets were frozen and he was ordered to pay the Dings £88,000. So, while the nation watched William and Kate get married, Ang Sang-do had gone to his shop to pick up a kitchen knife. Then, he headed towards the village where the Ding family lived.
My belief is that when he left the New Street station just after 11, he was going to Wootton in Northamptonshire with one thing on his mind, and that thing was murder, the ultimate revenge.
Ang Sang-do admits he entered the Ding's house via the back gate and finds Jeff Ding in the kitchen. They argue, and he stabs Jeff multiple times before attacking his wife Helen. He then goes upstairs and kills Zing and Alice. They are both huddled together in one bedroom.
What I can't reconcile, what I'll never be able to understand, is when that anger, that evilness, that bile is such that it makes a grown man climb a set of stairs, enter a room with 2 young girls cowering on a bed, frightened beyond description, and then plunge a knife into both of them and fatally wound them both without any compunction or restriction, just to execute 2 young. I'll never get over it. I'll never understand this.
During the trial, the jury also hears a recording of a 999 call. It was made by one of the girls when they heard Ang Sang-do attacking their parents.
It transpired that a 999 call had been made from the property at the time of the killings. Police had responded to the call, but had been sent to the wrong address and had no answer, and therefore the case was effectively closed.
I've heard that tape recording. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific. And those screams, I won't forget them, because I know what was happening when those girls were screaming, because a murderer had entered the room and was in the process of fatally murdering those two girls. Absolutely. I can't reconcile myself to that action. It's horrendous.
As the trial progresses, further details emerge about what happened after Du murdered the family.
After killing the family of 4, Du stayed in the house for 6 hours and actually went to sleep.
He then takes the time to wash the kitchen knife that he brought with him and leaves it on the kitchen worktop before stealing money and the Ding's hire car. He manages to evade authorities for over a year. But after a 2-week trial, Ang Du is found guilty of all 4 counts of murder.
Ang Du was found guilty of multiple murders and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the longest sentence ever passed down in the history of courts in Northamptonshire.
With all due respect, Ang Du is exactly where he should be in terms of the crime he committed and public safety.
The community were pleased something so barbaric had gone full circle, really, and the man who had carried out this dreadful crime had been put away.
The fact that he's never going to get out of prison, yeah, but it still should never have happened. But they've got as much justice as possible.
After 10 years, those that knew the family are still coming to terms with the loss.
I don't think there's ever any way that justice can ever really be done that can make up really for what happened. There isn't, and that's the closest we can get. And whatever punishment he got is never going to make up for for what happened that day.
I suppose there was some sense of, okay, that's over now, but you're never going to get those girls back, ever, and that's going to remain with me for the rest of my life.
Ang Du will be 92 years old before he's eligible for release. But for Jeff's brother, Ji-Xiang, life will never be the same.
I cannot accept, the reality, basically. And then I think about my parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, on one day. I have many questions to ask him. Among them, the only one question that strikes me most is, I want to ask him, how could you stab a knife into an innocent girl's heart? Not once, but twice. How could you do that? An innocent girl, you get that in. I'm not that confident whether I can rebuild my life anymore. I don't think my life will be the same again as before.